All right, ETM Hotep. So welcome back. Welcome back. This is your brother Wujau Meneb Edi Ma'at. And I'm also with members of the Sesh as well as members who jumped on the panel from our previous stream that we just ended. All right, so this stream is going to be the open discussion based around the topic that I just shared with you all on the importance of nomenclature. All right, so hopefully we could chime in on that topic, and if we venture off into other related topics, that's perfectly fine because we can kick back and talk about pretty much anything we like. Here it's open-ended, open discussion, open mic, and I'm gonna keep posting the link inside the chat to invite anybody on the panel. So all are welcome. Only thing we ask is that we show respect for one another, which should be the norm, and then also not talk over each other because that's not fair to the listeners. All right, that's really the only two rules that we like to enforce. All right, so we could just jump in. So again, welcome everybody. I guess we could kind of build up some small talk or whatever until people chime in. So far, we got 15,000 people watching right now. But if you all want to state your name and where you're hailing from and all that kind of stuff, we can do that. So I'll pass the mic.
All right. It's Travis from Houston.
Oh wait, Travis. I don't know what's going on with your mic, but it sounds like your mic is in your throat. I don't know if it's Bluetooth or what's going on.
All right.
Oh, there you go.
This is Travis from Houston, Texas. That's where I'm coming from. Just coming in just to soak up some more game.
All right.
Be a part of the conversation.
All right. Nice. Anyone else?
Hey, peace. This is Neusra. I'm in Maryland right now. I'm just calling in, making sure I'm trying to stay awake. But I love to go to sleep, like listening to stuff like this. Sometimes I go to sleep listening to this, and I'm just repeating stuff over and over in my head.
All right.
I'm gonna leave it at that.
All right. So we're gonna send you off into dream world. With you're gonna wake up with $1 million. You're gonna make $1 million. Whatever.
I love that.
I think we have somebody else. I don't see the name, but if you wanna say a few words or introduce yourself, I think the name is Matter. The Matterer. I don't know if your mic is working, but feel free to jump in, chime in. All right, so we're gonna keep it moving. So again, welcome to our discussion. This is an open discussion. This discussion is coming right after the previous stream that we just ended. It's called The Importance of Nomenclature. All right, and so just to kind of spark things off, I will just sum up what I shared earlier a little while ago. All right, and basically the reason why nomenclature is, first of all, what is nomenclature? Nomenclature in a nutshell is a system of specialized words that are used as a labeling system. These are words that are used as a labeling system, or words that are used in a technical sense to eliminate ambiguity within the confines of a topic, subject matter, or discipline, study discipline, scientific discipline. Every discipline, every study discipline, scientific discipline has a technical language we call jargon or nomenclature. I'll give you an example. I think June mentioned it earlier. In science, in many of the scientific fields, the word theory is used differently than how the regular average person uses the word theory. A regular average person will use theory synonymous with a guess, a hunch, an opinion, it's just a theory. Whereas in science, a theory is not that. A theory is actually a explanation of well substantiated facts. So theory and explanation become synonymous. You're explaining a set of facts. And if the facts change or the data within those facts, if you have new information, then your explanation may change. Hence, a theory may change. And because that happens, people think, oh, it was wrong. It was, it was just a hunch. It was just guesswork. No, that's not what it means in science. It means something different from science and on the streets. Same thing. Another example. In a courtroom, the word person is used differently than how we normally use it on the street. To us on the street, a person is a flesh and blood sentient human being. But in a courtroom, a person can be a non-sentient flesh and blood entity called a business. So a business, which is not a human being, is a person in the courtroom, but on the street, we would never call that a person. Okay, so that's another difference, and we can cite a whole bunch of examples. But the point here is that every discipline has a set of words that they use to eliminate ambiguity that will help aid the subject matter being discussed, pursued, shared, talked about, and expanded. And so my point earlier was that when we talk about quote unquote spiritual topics or religious topics, there's no nomenclature set. Everybody's using words all over the place. Worship this, worship God, atheist this, atheist that, spirit, soul, worship, veneration, devotion, praying, pray, praise. All these different words are used differently by different people who are fussing and fighting within these conversations. And we're not going to get anywhere if that continues. So it has to change. So that's basically a summary of what I shared earlier, but checked out the video. But I'm gonna leave it there and pass the mic. So we can open for discussion. So what did y'all think? If y'all on the panel now, or if you're in the chat right now, if you saw the last stream, what are your thoughts on it?
Can I be heard?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I was the one that was the wanderer, or I'm sorry, the matterer. I ain't never done this before, so I don't understand the twos and all that. But I just wanted to commend you on the amount of time and care that you've taken to express this. And I wanted to offer, in the form of a question, a way that might work to provide some type of power thrust behind what you're doing. When you talk about language, it seems to me that the animating force of language is missed by most of the speakers and the hearers for that matter. And that is words, they don't mean anything without the person. They don't exist without the person. If that is true, then would all beef be personal? And that's my question.
Okay, just say the last part of that one more time.
If those things that I've said are true, then would all beef be personal?
Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. All beef. They say, oh, it's not personal. You say beef, you're talking about between people arguing and things, right?
Correct.
In that sense, you could say so. But when people, and that's true, but people don't see it that way, which is why they say that. They're like, oh, it's not personal. It's not personal. Or in the reverse, they'll say, oh, this is personal now. Oh, it is personal now. But based on what you're saying and based on what I shared, though, it's all personal. And it's not really distinguished like that. And so
I get that. I agree. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. It is. It's all personal. It's all personal. And if people understood it that way, then they wouldn't put themselves in a delusion to think it's not, or think that there's a difference, and they would treat it a little bit differently, because what they're really saying is they're setting it up for, how can I say this? They're setting up a non-physical interaction and exchange to become a physical one. That's what people do when they start talking like that. Oh, it's personal, or it's not personal. They're making that an option. And so what they're trying to manifest some physical connection or physical issue from language.
And therein lies the power. If I do that, but I don't recognize that I have power to animate words, then I've disrespected myself also.
Right.
The human mind is so powerful. And when we do things like that, it's a form of self-disrespect, in my view.
Not only is it self-disrespect, though, it's basically in disrespect in a way that you're wasting the power of your mind, and that's disrespectful to yourself. And so, see, this is the thing. You know the saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me." That saying is, in a nutshell, that if we talk, like if I talk to somebody, there's nothing happening that should endanger someone. But yet people actually physically fight over words. And so at some point there must be a breakdown in order for that to occur, where one person and another person are exchanging words, and then those words or whatever they're doing translates into some physical altercation. And it goes back to what I said. So let me I'm gonna put it up as I'm saying this. It's in case people missed it. What is a word? So let me put the coin up. So every single word or thing that we call a word is really made up of 3 components, and people will definitely recognize 2. It's like a coin. So on one side we have form, on the other side we have meaning, or we have the concept. And so what happens is, when people say sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, the point of communication is to transmit meaning. That's the whole point of communication. We're not worried about the transmission of form. Where the whole goal of communication is to transmit meaning from one person to another, or from one person to many people. And it just so happens that we have to tuck it in to a vehicle, because we're not telepathic. So we have to put meaning within a vehicle, which is the form. That vehicle is a sound pattern or a written pattern. Just as I'm talking right now, the reason why I'm talking is because we're not telepathic. So I'm conveying my concepts in my mind right now. I have to put them in a form, which are these sounds that y'all hearing coming out of my mouth, and then you pick up on the sounds, and then you have to re-decode my meaning. And the only way you are able to do that is because you carry the same signs I do, because we both speak English. And so that's what I demonstrated earlier today. But what happens is, when people convey meaning, there is a breakdown. They allow that meaning, that concept, to feel like a physical threat, that something physical happened, and therefore they react in a physical way. And then that's when 2 people actually get physical and start fighting. So it's all of it's completely unnecessary. And all you have to do is to control the effect that the meaning has on your being. And so if I call you a name, like right now, if I were to call any male on this panel, I say, "You're a woman." Something light like that, you'll just laugh it off, like, yeah, whatever. But why can't people do that for everything that's not true, or whatever the case is? And that comes from maturity and cultivation of the mind. So what you're saying is absolutely right, but it's a whole lot of work. It's a whole lot more to that. It's the cultivation of different aspects of the mind that will allow people not to disrespect themselves, like how you said.
Why did you stop yourself from saying work?
You said a lot of work.
Yeah, you were saying something, and it sounded like you were gonna say work, but you stopped yourself, and I thought that was a perfect word. Why did you choose a different word?
No, because it takes cultivation. It takes a whole lot of work, and in order to be at the point where you can actually be in control. And there's a famous saying, and I paraphrase it. It's a question. Do you walk your dog, or do you allow your dog to walk you? And what that question is asking is, or pointing to, is the instinctive nature of our being. Are you going to allow that to rule your being, or are you going to use your intelligence and your higher mind or your higher cognition and things like that took work and cultivation to develop? Are you going to let that control the animal or the instinctive or animal part of you? And so
Can I ask one more? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I don't want to hog the conversation, but this is, for me, it's working for me, so I don't want to be too selfish. But can I ask one more question?
No, go ahead, because you know I'm passing out the link, but you know, trust me, I don't know what it is, but I don't know people. I think sometimes people get scared to come on here. But go ahead.
I'll be honest. I've been listening for a while, but I've never been motivated to call until today.
Okay, well that's good.
So here's my question: if you have a thing, and that thing can take two positions in a person's mind, positive or negative, what's the difference between the two?
Okay, ask that one more time.
If I have a thing, an idea, a concept, and that concept can take two positions, either positive or negative, what is the difference between the two?
There is no difference in the thing itself, innately in the thing. The difference is in who is doing the imagining. And so, who are you? That's the ultimate question.
If I go back to my original point, the difference is you, right?
Oh, most definitely.
You determine positive or negative.
Most definitely.
So our beef is personal again.
Exactly. But now, see, it's more to it than that, because this is the thing. There's two yous within you. There's and I'm putting it that way because just for the sake of trying to structure this explanation, there's two yous. There's a real you, and then there's a not real you. There's a pseudo you. And most people identify with the pseudo you, or the pseudo part of themselves. And that pseudo part of them actually identifies with what we call emotions. They actually think that they're mad. They actually think that they're angry, mad, depressed, happy, all this other kind of, all these different emotions that we go through. We don't separate the two yous, so we think all of that is really us. So when you say these beefs are personal, that second you is the person. The real you is the self. So if we were to do what I was saying earlier, set up a nomenclature, which is a precise labeling system, we have the self and we have the person. The self is the real you. The person is the you that you identify with. And if you don't cultivate that difference and learn to understand the difference between the two, you're going to think that that's the real you. And that's where people react. That's where people react when they're called names. They react to different things because they're allowing the animal part of them to control the self. And so
that's why I made up my name, the Matterer, because I make matter. Things that matter in my mind, I make them matter, right?
Right. So, exactly.
I am the Matterer.
Right. So now if I use your wording, the Matterer, you would be the ultimate perceiver. So you would be the self. and you choose, because now you recognize that you're the self and you're not the person, that you can choose. Now you have a choice where other people don't even know that they have a choice at all. And so they only identify with the person. That's all that there is to them. So when you say it's personal, so like I said, again, this is why it's important to have terminology. Because I understood what you were saying. Because if we were to label these things properly, that would be 1,000% correct. All beefs are personal because it involves the person. But if I were to just say that dry like that, then everybody's like, well, okay, that's everybody. No, there's a part of you. You know, the human being is not this homogeneous one thing. The human being is made up of multiple things working together. And one part of that is the person that most people identify with. Identifying is a critical thing. What do you identify with? And so if I tell a lie on you, most people won't identify with that, depending on the severity of it. You know, if I just call everybody on here women, depending on how I did it or whatever, no, people just laugh it off like, yeah, whatever, like you're bugging. But if I were to say something that's true that you may not wanted to share, whatever, and I just said something or whatever, then that will affect you. That will affect a lot more people than just lying. But in both of those cases, it's the person that's doing the reacting. So that's what it is. But words, like, to get back on the language plays an important part, because it's how we communicate with each other. We don't live on an island or in this whole universe as individuals. And so we communicate by the transmission of concepts from mind to mind. But we have to do it in a vehicle, be it a sound pattern or written pattern. And then people can misconstrue it because they're not decoding it back correctly. And we have a lot of that going on.
Right. So in the sense, for example, with the slide that you have on. Oh, okay, you took it out.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now I was just saying, that's good because, you were showing good examples between different languages, but the most part of what we see, even though it sounds like people are speaking the same language, but they are decoded, the meanings that are being decoded are completely different, but the concept behind those words are completely different because, for example, in conversations about religion or about God, people get asked, do you believe in God? Some people say, I don't believe in God. But then you realize they're using this form, this, sound pattern, God. But then everybody in that particular discussion has a different concept of what it is. So even just asking, if you say you don't believe in God, then you just can't say, I don't believe in God. You kind of have to identify, first and foremost, in, like you said, within every conversation, have, decide on what, nomenclature people are using, because then you have people who say they don't believe in God. And then, but if you kind of, like I think the test that you did with the declaration, if you ask somebody, okay, what if in the sense where in another place where God is everything in nature, or God is nature, then then it becomes like, in a sense, somebody has to kind of, change back from what they say that they don't believe in, and then be like, okay, then I believe in God. So then it's like, you don't have a proper standing because the concepts are completely different. So that's when, you realize that, we don't get anything done because, and conversations don't move forward, and solutions don't get solved because we just, people are talking about not believing in religion, or religious being bad, religion being bad, spookism and all that stuff. And then realize when you break it down to the, to what that particular word is, then there is no issue at all. Or the issue could actually be solved easily. So I think, that is really, really key in these conversations, that we really have to understand what we, the words, if you're going to talk about these words, especially religion and God, like what are they? Because over here it could be something that I might not adhere to, and then in another environment, then it's something that I actually might have to agree with. That is not bad.
Exactly. And so let's take that for example, because that's a good one about God, for example. Um, like with the diagram I have on the screen for the English sign, and it's the word elephant. So we have the word elephant spelled out, and then we have the pronunciation, how it's spelled, we spell it out. This is how you pronounce it, elephant. And in people's minds, they will conceive of, a large gray animal with big ears, weighs tons, snout, ivory tusk, etc. And we saw how that can change depending on what speech community we're dealing with. So I went through Spanish, the Luo, Swahili, Rani Kemet. But now, that was an example of translations. So like elephant in Spanish is elefante, in Kiswahili it's ndovo, in the Luo it's liech, in Rani Kemet it will be abu. So we're translating in that sense. But now, what happens in the same language when you're not traveling from language to language? So you're not doing translation, but you're staying within the language. But yet you have different forms on the form side for the same concept. What are those called? Anybody know? I'm sure somebody knows.
Ask the question again, please.
Okay, so when we go from one language to another language, and we're matching the conceptual matches, that's translations. Okay, because we're moving from a source language to a target language, and we're matching the concepts, and we're coming up with the different forms. So Undovo translates to English elephant. Okay. Now, my question is, what is it called when we don't travel from one language to another language, but we stay in the same language, but we have two different forms for the same concept? What is that called?
A homophone?
Nope. That was a decent guess, but no.
Transcription?
No.
Simile? No, that's like her as I don't know.
And this is for the chat too.
You said two different forms.
Within the same language. Two completely different forms in the same language pointing to the same concept.
Synonyms?
There you go. Synonyms. That's what it's called. Synonyms. So a synonym is an instance of a synonym, or a synonym would be a word that doubles the form that doubles for the same concept. So you have multiple words that will refer to the same concept, but within the same language. Those are synonyms. That's what a synonym is. Now you see how I asked y'all that, and it took some time to get the answer out, because people don't see it that way. Because what I'm showing on the screen, people don't look at language this way, and we don't expect people to, because in our day to day we don't have to look at language this way. But if we're gonna have these discussions, any kind of discussion like how we're used to seeing, we're gonna have to study these things. Period. You can't get around it. You got to be familiar with semantics, pragmatics, and at least the basics of the duality of what we call in words. You're going to have to.
So you hit it backwards. I bet I'll be curious to know, if you had a test, how many people, if you gave them the word synonym, would get the definition right, versus how many people would get it right if you gave them the definition first.
Well, this is what happens. If I were to if I were to take a quiz and ask people, hey, define synonym, close your book, define synonym. Like, don't cheat. Just tell me right now, top of your head, what's the synonym? most people would be able to give me a response. But see, here's the difference. Being able to dig into your programming and what you learn a synonym is versus recognizing one when you come across it actively are two different things. And so the way I'm asking now is for recognition. This is when, the boots hit the ground, where you got to recognize them versus being in a classroom environment and just regurgitating something. Because we can memorize a lot of things. Okay, the definition of synonym is blah, 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 blah. But if I don't ask you that way and I just show you some, can you recognize them and explain it? And so that's what this is. So what a synonym is when you have multiple words that are on the form side, multiple forms that point to the same concept, that are linked to the same concept. That's why, like, for example, big and large. The word big and the word large, they're spelled completely different. They sound completely different. But guess what? They're linked to the same concept in our minds. So those are synonyms. But if I say big in English, and I want to move, which means go to a language such as Spanish, I have to say grande. Now big and grande become translations of each other. Why? Because those two separate words in separate languages point to the same concept. So that's a translation. That's the difference. So yeah. So anyway, I'm just saying that there's a lot more to language that we take for granted because we grow up so young learning a language, and we use it day to day that we don't really look further than what we have to use it for, whatever is applicable. All right, but when we're resolving conflict, you got to be surgical. You got to be able to dig down and be able to dissect and detect all these different things so that we can come up with solutions. And so that's what the earlier presentation was about. Conflict resolution as a solution to conflict is to come up with a nomenclature for these various different topics we talk about. Spirituality, spirit. What is a spirit? Like, what is a spirit actually made of?
Can I answer that?
Oh, go ahead.
Letters.
The,
I'm saying it kind of funny. I did that to make a joke, but it's an abstraction. Abstractions can only exist in the mind.
Okay, so now what about those people who define spirit as an entity that can do something to you? That's not an abstraction.
Well, it's still an abstraction in that person's mind. And if they hold on to that and live their life by that, we might call them insane. But that does not negate that it exists in the mind. Matter of fact, I would posit that there's no other way to understand an abstraction but in the mind. I shouldn't say that. I'll just box myself into a corner. And all abstractions have to first exist in the mind because it's abstract. You can't touch it, but it has to be considered first in the mind. Then you can apply different tools to it to extract more meaning out of it.
Okay, well, you're right, but I'm just gonna dump something else on you. Every single thing, every single experience you go through, whether it's with tangible items or intangible items, takes place in your mind. There is nothing that you do not experience that does not take place in the mind. Our five senses, see, touch, taste, hear, smell, are the five input devices to the mind. So, and we experience the world by way of those senses, but they have to take place within the mind. So to differentiate between abstraction or things that are not tangible and tangible really has no value. when it's all said and done. So that's not the route to go when I ask about what is a spirit. So
Right, because just with what we just discussed, we understand that when you're using these words, whether it's sound sound part or written, then it points to a concept. So the question when somebody asks what is spirit, they're not asking about what is this sound I'm making with what spirit or what is the word spirit, but the concept behind it, because then everybody would define those different concepts differently. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I put it the way I put it is because I'm trying to extract as much meaning for myself as I can out of this conversation, right? So I'm in my mind willing to make um, room for things that might sound ridiculous to someone else, and then put it back together in a way that can be considered by whoever I'm speaking to. My purpose in doing that is because I want to find what is between positive and negative, right? Which is, some people may consider truth to be between positive and negative. Everybody says if someone says A and someone else says B and everyone says the truth is in the middle. Well, what does that really mean? And how can that be used as the tool to extract meaning out of this? So if I take language and I think, okay, language consists of words. Words are abstractions that a mind uses to give meaning. Then now I can have a conversation with someone about spirit that does not have to be realized in a physical form. Does that make sense? Am I just crazy?
no, you're not crazy, but you're overlooking quite a few things. So remember this, that a word, and this is what I hopefully I made clear earlier. What we think of a word is not what most people think. A word is really a sign. The technical term for a word is really a sign. And a sign is made up of three things: form, meaning, and the link between the two. So the form is physical. So although you said earlier that, spirit is, the abstract and stuff, we cannot convey concepts from one person to another directly. We have to package it or put it within a vehicle, which is physical. The sounds that you're hearing from my voice right now are physical. So I'm packaging these mental concepts in my mind into this physical vehicle called sounds, and I'm transmitting them to you. Your sense of hearing, picking them up, transmitting them to your mind, and then you have to have the same sign in your mind in order to decode them to know exactly what I'm talking about. So when I ask the question, what is spirit really? That's what I'm asking. And I asked this on Facebook before, and I got many different answers. And the reason why I got many answers is because no one has established a labeling system for all these different things. So you got some people said it's ether, some people said it's personality, some people said it was it's entity, some people said it was breath. I had so many different answers because it's ambiguous at this point. Because we haven't done what I was saying needs to be done in the previous video, which is we have to develop a system of language, specialized language for these topics. And so how are we going to define spirit?
I feel like a lot of times it's always it's defined based off of the context that it's used in.
Well, that's where you. Okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just gonna say, sometimes most of the time it's defined in a context, and we just use like context clues to sort of guess. But I mean, it still goes back to like, what do you mean by it? Because people can mean different things. Yeah, I really see it in different, because sometimes it could. I don't know. You could say like, "Hey, I'm in good spirits," but it doesn't have the same it doesn't have the same meaning as if you were to say people are communicating with spirit. Like it's sometimes I don't know, it's sort of nuanced. So I think I guess the best way to say it is it depends on the context that is used in for people to have a closer look or a closer understanding of what the person means by it.
And see, that's fine in day-to-day conversation. But whenever we're pursuing knowledge and we're trying to have a meaningful and progressive conversation to expand our knowledge of a particular topic, we have to establish a precise labeling system. So that ambiguity has to be eliminated. But you're right, meaning is born within context. That's why I say people need to study semantics and pragmatics. But the point is, within science, for example, no astrophysicist is going to talk to each other and mention the word theory and have to wonder, well, what do you mean by theory? No, what do you mean by theory? No, what do you mean by theory? They won't do that. Why? Because the word theory is an established word within that study, within that field of science. And so that's what I'm saying. We don't do that for these conversations.
An example would be somebody saying, defining a chair as something that you sit on. And then you have somebody in location A who sits on a mat, then says, okay, that's a chair. And then somebody in location B who sits on a bed, be like, okay, that's a chair then. And then somebody else in location C that sits on what we know as a chair, like that's a chair. So you have 3 different kinds of chairs because we use it as something that you sit on, as opposed to it being a definitive thing where it's like, this is what a chair looks like, And then everybody's like, will be like, okay, so I don't have a chair in my house, I have a mat.
Exactly, but that's the thing. In everyday conversation, we can figure those things out based on context, as the brother said, because meaning is born in context. There's a difference between definition and meaning, and I'm not sure people kind of separate those two. A definition is what you find in a dictionary. A meaning for something is born in the context in which it's used. All right, and then you have when we have these conversations, a specialized study where you have to develop nomenclature because you don't want to risk being wrong or dealing with words that are ambiguous. So you got to be surgical with it. And every single study, scientific field out there has a process where they eliminate ambiguity. They define their terms. Even when you buy a house, buy a car, when you sign a contract, most contracts will have a whole section for definitions of words. Why do you think they do that? They do that because they are eliminating ambiguity. They don't want any ifs, ands, or buts when it comes to collateral or you paying back a debt or whatever the case is. They want to make sure everything is crystal clear to you. And they have to do that by law, by the way. But that's the point. And so within these conversations about quote unquote religious things and spiritual things, we're supposed to do the same thing, but nobody ever does. So the conversations go everywhere. And that's why we're having a problem. Most of the problem, that's why I started the presentation by saying most conflicts are a result of miscommunication. Because look, when I show this again, I showed this earlier, but I didn't have the pictures above here. So if this person says mouse out of their mouth, they may be thinking of the rodent, a real rodent mouse with a tail and everything. This person may think a computer mouse.
We don't see if you're sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me share my screen. That would help, right?
Right.
Okay, so you got 2 people. This person says mouse. This person who said it is thinking of the rodent, the actual animal, rodent crawling around outside. This person is thinking of a wireless computer mouse. Okay, so here's what happened. In a day-to-day conversation, we don't need that degree of precision to communicate and get by. You know what I'm saying? It really doesn't create that much of a problem. But when you're actually tackling a subject to study and be scientific and be precise and try to expand our body of knowledge, you have to be very precise. You have to remove that ambiguity. So when you package this concept into a form, you have to package enough information in there so when this person decodes it, they know they know that you're not talking about a computer mouse, but you're talking about the rodent. You see what I'm saying? Whatever you got to do, you have to pack enough in that form right here for the word mouse so that when this person receives it, they know what you're talking about. You know, so if I just say, hey, go to the store and get me a mouse. Here's some money, go to the store and get me a mouse. I did not pack enough in that to make the distinction between a rodent or a computer mouse. I could be a lab assistant and need a mouse to do some tests, or I could have a snake, a pet snake, and I need a mouse to feed it. So I need an actual mouse. Or I could be, computers and my mouse broke and I need a new computer mouse. But the person won't know. But in day-to-day conversation, you can kind of figure that out from context and being around people and stuff like that. But in a specialized study or field, you can't operate that way. You have to establish a nomenclature, a very precise language, precise labeling system. And that's the difference. That's what's going on. Because, like, for example, if I'm talking to a Christian and I know that person's a Christian because I'm around them and stuff, then every time they say God, I have a very good idea of what they mean. So again, I don't have to be a stickler and meticulous about it because I can pretty much figure that out. But when you're doing a study and you're trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of different things, you can't do that. And that's the problem we're having right now. People are saying, I don't believe in God. But then you got to, what you mean? Which God? None of them. Okay, so you don't believe in any of them. That means you know about all of them? So that's like a lazy way out. But I don't believe in any of them. Okay, well then what is the concept of God to you then? Break that down for me. Tell me what that is so I'll know what you don't believe. You see? And a lot of people can't do that.
Question for you. When you said that the English language is expanding and you gave some reasons why, is that peculiar to English or is this happening in other languages as well and at the same rate?
Yeah, all languages change over time, but at different rates depending on their inventions, their, people's environments and things like that. But all languages change over time. And in form and meaning. On the form side and the meaning side, this is where you get what we call semantic scope, where one word may have a single denotation when it's first coined, but then over time it'll grow into very, very closely related connotations, and then that creates a semantic scope.
As a word is traveling through time, does it lose its original meaning?
No. It can. I mean, it can, but then if it does, it's a different word. See, we have to understand what words are, and that was the purpose of a previous video I did a while back called "What is a Word?" Remember, this is what a word is. Okay, let me do this. I'm gonna do this. Let me show this again, because I'm gonna show this on the screen as I say what I'm gonna say. Okay, so remember, this is what a word is. Now I'm gonna ask you a question. Let me see what I think of an example real quick. What's a good example? Okay, wait. Here we go. Here. So I'm gonna read this I didn't mention this tonight, but I'm mentioning it now. In linguistics, we have this term called a lexeme, and then we differentiate that from a word form. Okay, but let me describe what those two things are. I'm gonna read this. It's generally assumed that what we call a word was always a regular and identifiable form. Determining if a linguistic unit is a word or not depends on the language involved and has proven to be difficult. What is a word in one language may be two or more words in another language, or part of a word in yet another. Dictionaries appear to simplify this by categorizing a language's lexicon, or its vocabulary, into an ordered, which is usually alphabetical, list of lexical entries. However, in English, for example, do we consider the words move, moves, moved, and moving as different words or different forms of the same word? This demonstrates why the notion word is actually a foggy and ill-defined concept. A distinction must be made between the notion word in an underlying abstract sense called a lexeme and the notion word in the sense of a realized surface or concrete word as used in a sentence called a word form. So that's the difference between a lexeme and word form. Hence, a word form is a word with meaning and form, while a lexeme is a family of word forms that are inflectionally related. The word form chosen to represent a lexeme in dictionaries is called a lemma. The names of lexemes are conventionally written in small caps to avoid confusion between the two notions. In the previous example, the surface concrete words move, moves, moved, and moving can be qualified as word forms of the lexeme move. So all of those are really one word or one lexeme. You see what I'm saying? So now in our day-to-day conversation, we don't know this to be the case unless you study linguistics and you actually learn about this. But we don't know this as we're talking, but we can talk. Everybody communicates. I bet you everybody in the chat probably never knew this, what I just read, but yet spent most of their lives talking to people. You see what I'm saying? It's when we have to get technical or to resolve conflict is where we have to know about these things. And so when you asked me a question, you had to understand what a word is in the first place. You see?
Thank you for that. I did not know that. That's really good stuff. Thank you for that.
No problem. But this is the kind of stuff that we all need to know, at least in the basic. Now, we don't have to, go get a degree in linguistics and all that kind of stuff. But for those people who are participating in these polarized conversations about religion and spirituality, whatever, people are going to have to really take some time out to get some fundamental concepts under their belt first, if they want to solve the conversations. Because remember, every conversation is an encoding and decoding process. Every whether I write you a letter or whether I'm speaking to you, you're actually performing encoding and decoding actions every single time. And collectively in a whole conversation, the end result is supposed to be a successful decoding. And most conversations do not end in a successful decoding. It's unsuccessful. That's why people argue. That's why the arguments linger from day to day, month to month, year to year. And now people create a sport out of it and call the fussing matches debates and stuff like that. But that's where it comes from. So let me see if I have an example. All right, so here's an example. So here's to illustrate what I'm talking about. So I'm going to read this. In many languages, what appears to be a single form actually turns out to contain a large number of morphemes. And so for those who may not know what a morpheme is the smallest unit of a word that has meaning. All right, but I don't want to go off into that. The analytical process of isolating morphemes is called morphological analysis or segmentation. But here's the example. I want to get to the example. So here are 4 Kiswahili words: nitasema, nilisema, utasema, and ulisema. And the English translation is next to them. So here's a single Swahili word. Nitasema is one word. But when we bring it over into English, we now have 3 words. I will speak. So what's one word in one language becomes 3 words in another language. And so this is what translators have to deal with. That's why translation is not a straightforward or easy thing that people think it is. Nilisema, same thing, I spoke. Udasema, you will speak, 3 words. Ulisema, you spoke. Okay, so we can identify, and then we can identify what morpheme within these words are bringing about the differences in English. So we see the future tense will have to do with ta. So ta within the word is referring to the future. The you is dealing with the person. So here we have first person and second person. So first person in Kiswahili in this word is ni. Second person is u. The future tense is ta and ta for both of those. The past tense is li. So first person is ni, second person is u, same thing. And then the root of the word that gives its lexical meaning is sema, which means to speak. So that's how we would analyze this word morphologically. We will break down the different morphemes. Ni, ta, sema. So that's just an example of the difference. And so we have to understand all these things when we have these discussions. It may not seem like it's related, especially the way people talk about these things. So when I go back and ask, what is spirit? The same way how I did with the word praise, religion, veneration, all that kind of stuff, people will have to go back to see how the word unfolded in its usage. So what is spirit? What was the word spirit referring to? What is the concept on the concept side? That form spiritus in Latin, which is where we get the English form. But did we also inherit the concept side? That's the question, people have to look for. Because we know, okay, spirit in English comes from the Latin spiritus, but we're talking about the form. Spirit and spiritus. But the concept side in Latin was breath, wind. But today's English, that's not the concept anymore. You see what I'm saying? So if people don't understand what happened and how it happened, then they're talking about things and they get all over the place. So that's why I asked, what is a spirit made of exactly? Especially to those people who say a spirit can do this and do that. Spirits talk to them. Spirits can influence their life or do things on their behalf or harm you, help you or harm you. Well, if that's the case, what is it made of? And when people die and become a spirit, what separates them? Like when we're alive, we know what separates one human from another human. Our organs, our cells, our skin, and we could distinguish one human being from another. But when people die, for those who say they turn into spirits, what demarcates one spirit from the next one? Do spirits have a finite shape, a definite shape, a distinct shape? And if so, what limits that shape? What contains it? Because our skin contains ours while we're alive. Biggest organ on our body. So do spirits have an equivalent skin? And if so, what is that made of? You see what I'm saying? That's how the conversation can go, but people are not really ready to have that kind of conversation. That I know, in my experience. What is that? All right, so it got quiet over here.
Well, because we don't want to discuss something that we don't have a working definition for yet.
But now here's the thing. Like I said, and I think Niwa Sarah said it earlier, that meaning is born in context. So you can tell how a person used the word, and you can see what the concept side of the word is. So when somebody says, "Hey, I'm in good spirits today," that's different than a person says, "Well, hey, I'm going to venerate my ancestor, my spirits, my ancestral spirits." Obviously, those two people are using it differently. They're using the same form. They're saying the word spirit in sound pattern, but they're pointing to different concepts. And so you have to first sift through that. And that was the purpose of me asking on Facebook. And I got like a whole bunch of comments, but I roughly got about 10 different unique answers. Somebody said spirit is personality. And some person said spirit is energy. And I was trying to explain to that person before that when you say spirit, if your concept of spirit is energy, then your concept is not going to allow you to say spirit is immaterial, because energy is a property of matter. And if you think spirit is immaterial, meaning no matter, then it can't be energy. And they didn't get what I was saying to them. That energy is a property of matter, just like height. Height is a property of matter. How high something is a calculation. Energy is a calculation. It is the capacity to do work. That's what energy is. And it's a property of matter. Without matter, there's no energy. And so if a spirit is immaterial, meaning immaterial, no matter, then it can't have energy. Therefore, a spirit can't be energy. And
okay,
I try to.
So,
Yeah.
that's go ahead. I've been talking. Go ahead. I'm going on mute. Hello?
No, I wasn't saying that. I was just tripping up there. He just kind of killed that whole spiel.
So my question then would be, we just had a crazy tragedy happen on Sunday, and something occurred where people were in a similar place. Could you describe that something that occurred was spiritual? Some people might accept that, some people might not, but I'm curious to hear how you would break that down using language.
Well, it goes back to what they're conceiving as they're using these forms. Because like I said, some people's vocabulary, see our everyday vocabulary, words we use, is limited until we specialize in something. And that's when we expand our vocabulary. And so a lot of people use the same form, and in this example, spirit or spiritual, but they're going to be meaning different things. The concept side is going to be different, but they lump them all together. So a lot of people do that. A lot of people will explain things as a spiritual experience. Or, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And you got to ask that person, well, what's the difference to you? Like, what's the difference? Like, why do you make that distinction, religious from spiritual? Like, then they have to explain that. And then if they say, I had a spiritual experience, well, what do you mean by that? because now I have to put them in one of the 10 different concepts behind the word spirit that people tend to place. It's up to 10. Like I said, some people say it's a personality, some people say it's energy, some people say it's, ether.
Do you have children?
Yeah, I have children. Yep.
Have when they were really small, have you observed the phenomenon where the mother can leave the room and when the baby don't have to see or hear the mother leave the room, but that baby knows the mother left the room?
Right.
What is that? How would you describe that connection to that child and that mother, where the mother leaves the room, the baby, not having seen it, is on the floor playing with a toy, mother leave the room, baby knows mother leave the room, baby starts crawling, looking for the mother.
Yeah.
Something happened there. How would you describe it?
I wouldn't describe that as anything related to spiritual at all. That's a simple, the baby is able to sense it, because we have more than sight. So although the baby or infant did not see the mother leave, the baby is able to sense the mother's absence, and that's not spiritual. That has nothing to do. Wait 1 second. That has nothing to do with spiritual. If we're going to define spirit, a certain way, and like I said, I wouldn't be able to make that statement and just leave it dry and blank like that, because spirit is an ambiguous term. So before we even talk about that, or I mention spirit, we have to first define it, have a working definition. So when I talk to people, that's why I asked them. I say, okay, well, if you're gonna start mentioning spirit, help me to understand what you mean by spirit. And they'll say, well, spirit is energy. They're like, okay, go. And I can have a discussion, because now I know when they say spirit, they're talking about energy. They're not talking about an immaterial, spooky entity or whatever. They're talking about something material that has the ability to do work, to do something. And I can have a conversation, no problem. With that.
I think. No, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead first.
I was just gonna say what Senate Lisa was saying on the chat, that's in regards to the baby sensing the mother leaving, that's intuitive. I think that's a good point, because the same could be asked for, like, how women always, like, everybody's experienced, or a lot of guys have experienced women talking about, they know that a man is cheating, and that it's like intuition. So would you explain that as something spiritual as well? In that regards, when you sense something without knowing. So you wouldn't call that spirit, like women are spiritual. That's why they know that, sometimes a man is cheating.
I think that's a good point. I was going to say, since we're on the topic of children and women, it makes me think about, I read something and it was saying that the most spiritual experience that a woman could have is when she's giving birth to the baby, because it's sort of their spirit or leaves their body, their physical body. And you notice a lot of people have relationship issues after children. Something does definitely happen. And I've been in the room, 3 times, and it happens in different ways. I think it could have been something from South Africa I was reading. I can't remember. It was years ago, but it was basically translated, I'm guessing, from the original language, saying that basically they say that, and I think they say that there's this fire at the base of the spine, and it sort of raises up. It doesn't talk about chakras or none of that, but it puts you in the line. Yeah, it doesn't say that. It doesn't use those terms, but definitely says that they're using figurative language, saying that there's something that happens, and it's one of the most spiritual experiences that a woman could have. And I always try to prepare, like, the mom, and just tell them about different things, like, yo, this is what's going to happen. But so that makes me think about something spiritual. The first thing that comes to mind is when a woman has a child. like and they're in labor and they're trying to like do it without the epidural or something like that. Like, man, you see something. And that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of spiritual. I don't think about ancestors. I think about women giving birth. Like, so when you brought up children, it just put me in a mindset of that.
Well, but see, now this is the thing. Again, if we're gonna talk about, see, we're actually starting to talk about something that could be up under the umbrella of spiritual discussion or religious discussion, right? And as I presented earlier, in order for us to do that, for any productive way, we would have to understand nomenclature and everything, because these words are misused a lot. Even, for example, when we say that if the baby doesn't see the mother leave the room, but when the mother leaves the room, the baby all of a sudden changes its behavior and start looking for the mother, we may say that's intuition. But now you got to now say, well, what is that? What is intuition? Because just tossing a name on it may not help the understanding or the unfolding of the understanding of what's going on. You understand? So, like how I defined the words earlier, I'll define worship, religion, praise, devotion, veneration, and all that other kind of stuff. You would have to do the same thing for intuition. What is intuition? What is it? You know, because the reason why, this may seem like real meticulous or whatever, and nobody's really going to be breaking down every word that comes out of their mouth. No, we don't have to do every word, but we have to do what's called keywords or polarized words that run the risk of being ambiguous among different speakers, even though they're chiming in on the same subject. Those words, yes, you do. So you definitely have to slow the conversations down to be able to do that. If you're not willing to do that, then you might as well not even have the conversation, because you're going to go around in circles. You're never going to solve the problem that's created within the conversation. Okay? And so even with that, people will have to define that, because intuition today, how it's used today, it defaults to an ambiguous use by default. If you were to look up intuition, it will tell you that it's used as like some kind of spiritual perception. But saying that puts us right back in the ocean of ambiguity. Spiritual perception. Well, what's that? You see? So this is why I went through this earlier, that on these polarized terms, it is best that you understand how it was coined and how it developed over time. That's called its etymology. Even though words, the meaning of words will change slightly, but knowing its history will let you know its trajectory. And so intuition comes from a word which simply meant to watch something, to examine something, to look at something. That's what the word came from, to look at something. That's different than what people use it for today, some spiritual perception. The word perception means to perceive, but then they put spiritual in front of it as an adjective. What kind of perception? A spiritual perception. So now they dumped you into the ocean of ambiguity. Now you got to say, oh, well, what is spiritual then? You see, so we're right back at square one.
Yeah, but not to run away from intuition, I would go with the baby instance. I would go with the senses, because you've seen those instances where if a baby's crying and the mother is not there, and they take a piece of cloth of the mother and they put it near the baby, and the baby smells, like the mother scent, then it stops crying. So I would definitely go with senses in that sense, as opposed to something spiritual. And because we don't even know what spiritual is, but through different conversations, my perception of what people perceive spiritual as is, as soon as something is not easy to explain, then it gets lumped into a folder named spiritual stuff.
And that's dangerous, because again, it puts you back into an ocean of ambiguity. So again, we're leading back, and that's not the direction we're supposed to go. We're supposed to go from being ambiguous into being unambiguous, or eliminating that and being very precise, being very surgical. So with the baby instance, it's an instance of pattern recognition, and these pattern recognition, what a baby perceives and what we all perceive, are patterns. And some of us may be aware and sensitive to a change in pattern. It could be the smell, it could be the noise, because over time in our life, we'll be numb to it, but as a baby, we'll be keen for it, because the underdevelopment of our mind, number one, and then even physically, with the brain and things like that, a child will by instinctively be keen on certain patterns for survival, and that's
So
encoded in human beings. Because you got to understand, we have more than one brain. We have one organ that we call the brain, but the brain is made up of different components that mature and develop over a period of time. So your frontal lobe doesn't even fully mature until you're around over 18 years old. So there's certain things that happen. The instinctive part of our behavior, the thing that regulates our fight or flight, our mode of survival, is in the lower part of our brain, called is nicknamed the reptilian part of our brain, but it's the I forgot the technical term for it, but that's responsible for our instincts, why we eat, why we lean to our mother's breast for milk and stuff like that. Okay, that's
is
not
it the amygdala?
no. It's the reptilian brain. If you look up reptilian brain, it'll tell you the technical term for it. They nickname it reptilian brain because of the size, and it's shared by reptiles. That size of that part of our brain is like the brain stem. That size and what it functions as is shared by reptiles, so they nickname it reptilian brain, reptilian part of the brain. You got the mammalian brain, the reptilian brain, then you have the human brain, which is the frontal lobe and all that.
So in Kemet, when they talk about like the Sahu and the Ba and the Aku and the Ren, and like I think it's like 9 of them. That's not. Would you associate that with? Because I think that's like the subtle parts of, not like necessarily the physical body. Because you got the name, and I can't really think of any of the Ka bit. Like, would you associate that? And I know you guys did a show on it. I just can't remember off the top. Would you associate that with the spirit, or do you think people are also, when they speak of spirit, they're associating it with some of those concepts?
That's interesting, because the problem when coming from Kemet or Rani Kemet, the Egyptian language, into English, translators tend to translate multiple words into the English word spirit. So you look up Ka, it'll say spirit. Look up Ak, it'll say spirit. Look up Ba, it'll say spirit, sometimes say soul. And then in English, spirit and soul are used synonymously now, today, in today's times. So again, it's an ocean of ambiguity. But to the Egyptians, they were distinct concepts. They were distinct. But in English, you lose that distinction. Okay, so you have the Kaibit, the Ka, the Ba, the Sahu, the Ib, the Ak, Sekhem, and the Ren. And then the Kat for the physical body. That's probably the only one that people get right, or understand, because the physical body. But the other ones, they're often translated as spirit, and that creates a problem, because now not only is it translated as one word, but now even in English, like the word spirit itself is ambiguous. Is spirit an energy? Is it an entity? Can a spirit do harm? Can a spirit help you? Can it hurt you? When people die, do they become spirits? And like I said, what distinguishes spirit one spirit from another in a spiritual world where spirits live? Is it just a blob of spirit, or are they individuated like how we are humans? We're distinct from one another. So are spirits distinct from one another? And if so, what demarcates them? What separates them? Is it like, and then why are spirit
Yeah,
why
how?
no good.
No, I said that was a good question because when you think about it, um, when if spirit, if one spirit is different from another, which means there's some demarcation, then it's not. Then that kind of doesn't equate to how we look at, or most people look at spirit, because once you demarcate something, then is it you know it's not something that's just how do I explain this? Then it doesn't become something that then it has a form, pretty much.
Right. In order for anything to be a thing, it has to have differentiation, it has to have a form. If it doesn't have a form, then you can't make a distinction. It has no ID. No ID, it doesn't exist. And so, that these are questions. These are things that people are gonna have to solve when they're having these spiritual and spirit conversations. One, they're gonna have to come up with a working definition of what a spirit is and define it precisely, and then they're gonna have to answer questions based on however they're gonna define it. And I've experimented this for years with people, interacted with people. And at the most, I think I've got 9 or 10 distinct answers for what a spirit is from people. And I can have a conversation with all 10 of those different meanings. See, as long as you know what somebody means by the key words that they're using, you can talk to them. It's not a problem. I can talk to a Christian who believes Jesus is God. I don't have to fight them. I can have a conversation with them as long as I understand their concepts behind the words, the forms. Because now, let me ask you, have y'all ever heard of two people speaking the same language but not understanding each other?
Yes.
Definitely.
Right, that happens all the time. But they're not really speaking the same language. If we understand, see, now me, I understand what's going on, so I would not describe it that way. But you heard the saying, two people can speak the same language and not understand each other. That's not true. They're not speaking the same language, although they're sharing the same forms, but their signs are different. So here's a quick example. The form God. Okay, y'all hear me utter it, God. Now, I may utter God, but my concept is a bearded guy from the Middle East somewhere whose name is Yeshua. But if I'm talking to a Muslim, when they utter God, they're definitely not conceptualizing what I did, what I conceived. And that can cause a conflict. We're not speaking the same language, but we use the same form. So, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'm gonna give you an example. So if somebody has had a comment, I'm gonna find an example to give y'all. And this is gonna really drive the point home that I'm making right now. So let me share my screen. So I'm gonna do this for y'all. And like I said, this is not rocket science. What I'm sharing and showing, it's nothing special about this, but it's maybe something that you overlook or just don't think about. But here's an example of what I mean. All right. So I'm gonna have I know y'all should be able to see. Can y'all see my screen? Yeah. Okay. I always like to use whiteboards. All right. So we're gonna put English up here, and we're gonna put another language over here, Luo and English. All right. And I gotta give credit for Emiket for giving me these examples for another conversation. But I'm gonna put this here. The word or and the word or. Now in English, that form, this is a form. By form, I mean sound or the written pattern, sound pattern, written pattern. So if you see something spelled OR, that's the written pattern. If you hear it uttered or, that's the sound pattern. The same exact written pattern and sound pattern exist in two different languages. But do they mean the same thing, Emiket?
No.
All right, so in Deluo, what does this mean?
Send.
Okay. Send. In English, this would be a conjunction or disjunction. This or that. But yet it used the same form. All right, I'm gonna give another one because I don't want to bore y'all. So let me break down another one. Everybody in English who speaks English should be able to read that. So somebody on the panel pronounce that in English.
Anyone mature? Mature.
Right. Anyone mature or anyone mature. Right. I'm sure everybody in the chat should be able to see that. Anyone mature. And in English, we hear that and we know, we have an idea what it means and so on and so forth. So, but in Deluo, that same spelling, so now we're going to spelling. That same spelling produces something completely different. Completely different. Okay? So Emiket, can you do us a favor and pronounce it in Deluo?
No problem. Anyone mature.
All right, do it again because I want to make sure everybody hear how you pronounce it.
Anyone mature.
Okay, Anyone. Oh, I'm help me out here. Break it down. Say it slower.
Anyone
Anyone
mature.
mature.
Yeah.
All right. And what does it mean?
That means I have stepped on and broken him, it, or her.
So I have stepped on and broken him, it, or her. That's totally different meaning than what we have in English. But yet they look identical. These look identical and sound identical. These look identical, but they're pronounced differently. And they have different meanings altogether. Okay, so again, it goes back to the importance of understanding. So my point for showing this is because in a conversation, this type of things happen all the time. Even when you think that you're speaking the same language, we make that assumption and we take it for granted. But if we're ever going to advance knowledge and expand on knowledge and come to some kind of resolution for the miscommunication and conflicts, we're going to have to start slowing things down and have this understanding under our belt. Because like I said, a Christian God is different than a Islamic God, a Muslim's God in many cases. Okay? A Christian will say, Jesus is God. But a Muslim will be adamantly against that. Allahu Ahad. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but Allah. Illallah. Except Allah. Allahu Ahad. Allah is alone. Allah is one. Same thing with Jews. Same thing. So, but in English, they all use the word God. You see? So the same thing about spirit. Spirit becomes ambiguous because some people mean it to mean energy, the capacity to do work, do something. Some people use it as a force, which is really the pressure of pulling and pulling on an object. That's a force. And that's more inclined with the original coining of the word, which meant wind or breath. Because I'm going to tell you, spirit, excuse me, when spirit was coined, it was a Latin word for wind or breath. Right after it was coined, it began to be used metaphorically for anything that can't be seen, but causes objects to move, but you can't see it. So wind is something that you can't see, but it can affect objects that you can see. It causes them to move. So that's the pressure or the pushing and pulling on an object. So that would be a force. So a lot of people, when they say spirit, they mean force, but they'll try to say it's an entity that can do something or whatever the case is. It's an entity of itself. Or they'll say, oh, it's energy. Because people think energy is a force. But it's not. Energy is a calculation. That's all it is. It's the capacity to do work. And it's measured in joules.
So other languages use one word to mean many things. So wouldn't you say like it's just similar to that with what people do as well, like with spirit, like they're using the one word to mean many things? Like I can't think of an example off the top, but it just sort of popped in my head, and I wanted to ask you that.
Well, that's the thing. No, that's one of the points I'm making. They're not the same word, although they have the same form. They're a different word. A word is really 3 elements in one: the form, the meaning, and the link between the two. So I can share forms, but have different concepts that those forms link to. Hence, they're not the same word. So we got to get off this calling the form part the word. Because if I use spirit to conceptualize energy, and then the next person uses spirit to conceptualize a force, although both of us are using the word spirit, guess what? We're those are 2 different words.
It's like book and book. They have the same form, but it could, they have, they mean different things. We have a book that is, a physical thing made of, paper that you read, is written on, or you can write on. And then you have book, which is, like reserve something. They look the same, but they're different.
Yeah, that's a homonym, right?
Right. We would call it a homonym.
Correct.
Homonyms are words that, or altogether homonym. But homophone would be words that sound alike but mean 2 different things. So if we're dealing with just the sound part. So, but that's what people have to understand. So just because we're tossing these words around God and stuff, so we have to be very precise in these conversations, and that's the whole point. These conversations have to be slowed down. There's no way around it. There's no getting around it. If we don't do it, the same things people argue about this year, they're going to argue about next year, the next. Because, like, for example, just in my tenure on Facebook, I joined Facebook in 2009 or 10. And in 10 years, I've seen the same arguments come up repeatedly. And the reason why is because what we're talking about tonight is not taken into consideration. And it's going to continue. There's no getting around it at all. There's none. And this is outside of figuring this stuff out. Then people have to have a conversation about they have to dig deeper into semantics, because now you have to separate literal from figurative. And that's a whole nother beast to tackle. But people want to rush ahead and talk about that before even understanding what I'm talking about tonight. Like what does it mean when somebody says so and so has a religious mind, or you're religious minded? What do people mean by that? You're religious minded.
Something negative, probably, in that context.
Yeah, but what do they mean?
You just gotta guess, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's probably definitely something negative or derogatory, but what do they mean really? You know, religious minded. What is a religious mind? You know what I'm saying? So we in these conversations we carry a lot of baggage of assumptions. Like if assumptions was a person, boy, that bus will be full of a dude called Assumption. The whole family of Assumption, the Assumption family be all up in the car with you, having the conversation. And see, we've been on here for a while already, but there's an answer to that, and I would like to discuss it. And I'm just going to give y'all a hint, or what do you call it? That's a teaser for the conversation, but I would like to have a whole conversation about it. It really boils down to, a lot of these things really boil down to a battle between two things. Ignorance versus knowledge. That's what it boils down to. On every single level, like all these conversations, eventually I can narrow down to a dichotomy between knowing something and not knowing something. Belief versus knowledge, or ignorance versus knowledge, however we want to label it. Those are the two opposing or opposite poles. And I recently did a post, so I'm gonna give you an example. Anybody can answer this. What does the word believe mean? When somebody says I'm a believer, or I believe it.
You accept something.
Yep.
You accept without necessarily knowing.
Exactly.
The root word is like belie, right?
Nah.
No.
that's wordplay. Belie to Eve. We heard that. We heard that breakdown. So, all right. So let's do this. Let's figure it out. What? See, again, that's one of the ambiguous terms that people toss around. Whenever you deal with that, you have to know its history. So you have to look up its etymology. Understanding how to use etymology. A lot of people misuse etymology, by the way. But if you use it properly, it's a very valuable tool. Very, very valuable. So somebody right now, let's do this live. Look up the etymology of the word believe. Or belief. And I don't like dead airspace, so I'm gonna keep talking while somebody looks that up.
Yes, I got it.
Okay, so read that to us, the etymology.
Okay, so this is believe. It's Old English, beliefen, to have faith or confidence in a person. Alia gilifa, gilifan, from Proto-Germanic, go Galabian, to believe, perhaps literally, hold dear, to love, or in Old Saxon, believe, Dutch, geloven, Old High German, geloben, ultimately a compound based on pi root, lieb, to care, desire, love. There's still more. Should I read? Continue reading.
Yep.
So, meaning be persuaded of the truth of, in brackets, a doctrine, system, religion, etc., is from middle 13th century, meaning credit upon the grounds of authority or testimony without complete demonstration, accept as true, is from early 14th century, general sense, be of the opinion, think is from around 1300, related to believed, formerly, occasionally, be left or believing.
Okay, so hold up. So all right, so let's unpack that. So you can see how over time the word was tight and then it loosened up a bit. So originally belief had a denotation of something dealing with holding dear, to love something, holding it dear. Then by the 13th century, it changed from there to accepting something without demonstration. And so it changed over to trusting in something that was not demonstrably trustworthy, meaning no demonstration. And so if we had to summarize this thing, belief would be the acceptance of something that you hold dear without knowing, without going through a learning process, without it being demonstrated to be the case. So, and if I had to sum it up to one word, it's ignorance. It means not to know. You're accepting something without knowing it, without learning it. Okay? And so that's what belief is. And then, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's interesting because it says when you credit upon the grounds of authority or testimony without complete demonstration. And we hear when people say about the consensus or academia says this and all that kind of stuff. So those kind of people could also be lumped under believers.
Exactly. That's a belief. And that's the difference. And that's what I say. Remember the reason why I'm even talking about this right now is that I'm saying that it boils down to two things: belief versus knowledge, ignorance versus knowledge, or belief versus science. Because remember, science, the word science means to know, and belief means to trust in something that you don't know. They're opposite of each other. And so when somebody says that somebody is religious minded, what they're trying to imply is that the person is susceptible to accept things without going through any learning process or without having the need to see evidence for it, and so on and so forth. Because remember, the word faith comes from the Latin fides, which means trust. And you can only trust something after you have watched it or tracked it. That's where it starts. And then the definition or the meaning loosened up over time to where you don't have to track it, but yet you can still accept it. And that's when you have to have that kind of trust in something. But people like to play and put adjectives in front of faith and say blind faith versus regular faith and so on. So we all know that these different nuances exist, and we try to deal with them by saying blind faith versus faith, or true belief or strong belief versus weak belief. We try to cover it, but that still doesn't help. But that's what it boils down to. And people are going to find out that God, as a concept, the way it's used today, is really going to equate to that space of ignorance. Because the only time God is invoked in all of these different things around the world is when a group of people don't know something. When they know something, they don't have to invoke God. They just don't. And so I'm going to have that conversation, though. God is ignorance. Imhotep Ra. That's what God's going to end up being. For the majority. Now there are people who use the term God to equate to reality. And so I'm not talking about that word God. The word God that a lot of people tend to use equates to ignorance. It's at the frontier of our knowledge. On the other side of that wall is where God lives. God lives in the abyss of what people don't know versus what people do know. And we see this throughout human history. When human beings as a whole did not understand thunder and lightning, they attributed their ignorance to a god. But now we understand how thunder and lightning happen, what causes it, and the whole nine. Nobody would imagine saying God is responsible for that or call thunder and lightning gods today. But in early human antiquity, that's what they did. Volcano eruptions, earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, thunder, lightning, floods, they attributed to God. Why? Because they did not understand it. It was ignorance that caused people to invoke God. Once you know something, no need. So anyway, I'm not trying to hog up because I'm trying to keep this within the subject matter of nomenclature and these words and stuff like that. But but I do want to have future conversations about those things because all these things are important. Anybody else?
I did put up a link from the Sesh Netcher for Wujao's desk because I think some of the stuff that you went over, on those articles dating back like 3 or 4 years back is like the same things that we see happening over and over again. And in this particular one, I think you had one with spirituality, mislabeling, spookism. We had false identification, and others like figurative languages and all that kind of stuff that we see. But it's interesting that it's the same, like any kind of issues we see going on nowadays. It's like those are things that you've written about before. So it just shows that there's a part we recycle conversations a lot, and we're recycling them for not for the purpose of finding a solution, because otherwise we would not need to recycle them. But it's more like or either people sometimes perhaps also people want to find a solution, but because I guess they're not really tackling like how you've done, where it's like we have to be really surgical with it, otherwise we wouldn't have actually be going over the same thing year after year after year. Because it's crazy, because reading through those articles, the same things you're talking about now you've talked about before, and it's the same things we are witnessing. But then now it's becoming more clear that the reason why we find ourselves in these places is because we really we haven't found we don't use our words properly. So it's like if we false identify stuff, then you're not going to solve anything. So I guess that is the crux of the whole thing, that we have to kind of identify these things properly, label them properly, and then we can have a conversation, and then we can actually have a solution.
Yeah, remember, every communication is an act of encoding and decoding. And when people don't encode enough information in their encoding part, then on the receiving side, they can't properly decode it. And then the flip side exists as well. Some people will encode enough information, but on the receiving side, they just don't have enough a development of that sign to actually decode it properly. And in both of those cases, it results in misunderstanding. And when misunderstanding grows and blows up, it'll lead to conflict in a lot of cases. And that's what happens. That's the source of a lot of conflict. Most conflicts is due to miscommunication. And until people understand how language works, then we're always going to have this. And, so it's going to exist, but we can limit it just like any other study does. That's why in all the major fields of science, they eliminate this. That's the first thing that they do. That's what actually governs and starts the discipline itself. Whenever you hear a new branch of science is developed, the first thing that you'll notice that they did or are doing is creating a very precise labeling system or nomenclature. That's
Yeah,
it.
I have a question. It's still on topic. I wanted to hurry up and ask before you guys ended it. So I know Asar comes from like Wasir, or it would sort of be translated more properly or appropriately like Wasir. So does Aset and Waset, are they connected in any way?
Aset and Waset and Ashe and those words, they are related to each other. Wasir, Wasser, Aset, and all that. There's some there's some relationships going on there between those words.
In terms of Aset and Waset, like so is that one of the gnomes? Also, I know it is one of the 42 or probably more gnomes Waset, but was it the place where she was sort of deified in Waset, or was no? Okay, so it's not connected in that way. All right.
No, what happens is when you look at the name Wasir in the glyphs and you look at Aset in the glyphs, they both use the high back throne. And that throne is transliterated in the case of Osiris, is translated as WS. That's where we get West. And then the I, which is the depiction of an I, is transliterated as IR. So you have Wesir. And that's where they get Osir or Osiris from. But now when you go to Aset, even though it's using the same glyph, they don't transliterate that as WS. They transliterate it as AS. So you get Ast or Aset instead of Waset in her case, and that's where the difference of confusion comes.
And is it true that per Aset is where the name Paris got its name from?
Oh, I don't know that. No,
Okay, I read sure. Anthony Browder. It was in the book that I read, and I know you said that you had some type of communication with him. So I was thinking maybe he got that translation from you or something like that.
Oh no. I don't know anything about that. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I don't have any knowledge of that. Nope. But that's where people get Aset. You know, the confusion, a little bit of confusion with Wasir and Aset. Because they share the glyph, one of the glyphs, and they're transliterated differently. And so, yeah, Wasir. And some people say Asir. So it's different. So Asir, and then Aset versus Wesir and Weset.
Okay,
so it's
cool.
Different. Mm-hmm. And Set. See, the word Set is the word for chair. The actual throne is called a Set. It's called Set, not a Set, but Set. ST. A place to sit.
So I see so many similarities, and I know you shouldn't do it with language, but like sit, sat, seat, like you think it just happened to be that way, or do you think in languages, like, because even in our English language, like sit, sat, you already know what I'm getting at, like, and I know in language you shouldn't do it, but it's so many different things. Like when I'm looking at the Sesh, I see so many similarities, like, that I'm like, yo, this can't be random. Like in terms of, like you just said, sit, set, seat, or even with sir, like when people call people sir, and you get, when you're looking at Wasir or SR. It sort of translate with the SR. Like,
Hey,
I don't want to look. I'm not trying to get pseudo. I just the door was open
hey,
and I had to ask.
how about the the head looking sideways? We usually transliterate TP,
Yeah,
tip,
yeah,
and then you have an English top, tip, tap, and all that too.
right, right. But see, here's the difference because there are some links to some of these words like that, but it's just that you have to be able to demonstrate that without and rule out chance, rule out borrowing, rule out coincidence. So you have to have a scientific, systematic way to, come to those conclusions. So there are some words you can actually do that with, and come to find out that they are from the same ultimate source. Tip, top, tep, which is the best part, the top of something, the tip of something, the front.
And even priest, like maybe it's just a way that I remember stuff. But him, like I don't know. There's so many of them I could think of.
Yeah, I think those are good mnemonics. Like there's some are coincidental where they you can use them as like a mnemonic stuff, like an easier way to memorize stuff. I remember was it Kevin and Sichio had the other one with Hennessy and then Henny
Oh
to
yeah,
jubilate.
right.
So some things, are good mnemonics, like, but some people tend to take them literal. Like we've heard about the candle wick, where it
Mm-hmm.
was like DNA, and then somebody could use that, and but that could be a good tool to kind of help you remember what it is. But some people will literally translate those to factual stuff that they're not.
Yeah, it's some that I definitely look at, like the mnemonic, like the HR, like the guy with the big ears. It's like, yo, it looks like he can hear everything. So it's some of them I definitely I use as like mnemonics, but some I'm like, well, this can be, and I'm like, I can't wait till you guys go live. I'm gonna ask, but then when you go live, it's like it's more scholarly, and you don't really want to, so it's more structured rather than just being creative and just going all over the place. So yeah.
I
Yeah.
read some on academic edu where it talks about, I think, Latin, uh, Greek, or and some other. I think they supposed to be in fluent. I mean, it's in academic edu, so
Well,
I don't
listen.
know.
Yeah.
Some of the words, like if you are a person that deals with etymology of words, some etymologies will be incomplete, and they'll say, perhaps this, or it'll say it's come from an unknown origin. A lot of times in those places, those origins that where they say unknown, it's not a conspiracy with it, but when they say unknown, most of those words that when they say unknown, they have African origins. Most of
That's
those
why it's
words,
unknown because they not familiar.
right. It's not like a conspiracy, but it's the fact that a lot of these lexicographers and etymologists and things like that, they did not take the time out to study African languages as they did Indo-European ones. And so, though where they fall short, they'll say unknown because they haven't done the work. But then it'll take other scholars to come behind them and say, well, wait a minute, we'll use the comparative method and we'll track it out, and now we know that it's not unknown. It actually comes from a African source. The very word God, God, the word God as it's used. No, now when I say God, I'm using it not in the sense that God is Jesus or whatever. But that word is actually an African word. People say it's a German word, gut, and good, and all this and that, but it actually ultimately track back to Africa, and it's actually cognate of the word Netcher. And what's crazy is that people will equate Netcher with nature to avoid using the word God, but actually the word Netcher is cognate with the word God and not nature. And that's
I read that in the sub. I'm like right there, them pages. I
oh
just
exactly
read that like a couple days ago.
Netcher and the Egyptian word Netcher and God are cognates.
Say, but don't God, who the God, don't it also means to pour?
Yeah, that's one sense. It means to pour out, and they attribute to libations.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Like even the word deity. Like if you look up the word deity, deity originally meant the sky. The sky. You know? So again, like until people really buckle down on these word usage, they're never gonna solve the conversation. The conversation is always gonna be people come together to converse. You're supposed to have a meeting of the minds, and I had that slide up. But when people disperse, it doesn't result in the meeting of the minds. Then that means that conversation failed. Because listen, the goal of every conversation is to have a meeting of the minds. So if you walk away from a conversation and you didn't have a meeting of minds, that conversation failed. Period. Conversation failed. Because misunderstanding or conflicts come from misunderstandings. Like I said, I can sit down and talk to a Christian and I have no problem. I have no problem talking to them. Even people who want to talk about spirituality. As long as I can get as long as I can point to what they're conceptualizing when they use those terms, I'm good. I'm okay. If a person believes that a spirit is energy, I can continue the conversation, but I need to know that though. Versus a person who thinks spirit is an entity, an actual entity that can affect your life. Because energy can't do that.
Spirit can be in some traditions is memory. Spirit is resulted to as the memory or as thoughts.
Right. Now, if that's the case, if spirit is equated to memory, then that's when you get into sustaining something, holding on to something. And that's the human's ability to reach back in previous experiences and pull them into the present here and now. And we do that all the time naturally anyway, but for spirits we specifically do it, and we call it memory. To remember someone and to remember that person, it's what do you call it, encircled, and we call that encircling of that person's identity or name. That's why the word Ren is written in the glyphs with a circle, a rope that is encircled. And so the Shin that the king's names are in are actually Ren. Shin means to encircle, but what that encircling does, it produces an identity called a Ren. So at the same time we're looking at a Shin, we're also looking at a Ren in the glyphs. And that's what's to be remembered. And as long as you can remember a person, they will live. As soon as they're forgotten, they cease to exist. That is eternal life. Eternal life is really the holding on to or sustaining of a person's identity. That's real. That's real eternal life. Or at
Yeah,
least
that's why they
Think about that.
that's why they equated in some traditions to the memory because they say the ancestors are the spirit. So they um basically like when you go through the elder and then the ancestor, right? They the ancestor is always remembered. We always remember through uh pouring libation, always remember through uh different types of ceremonies. So the ancestor is forever living through the memory because you never forget that person because he had transitioned into the ancestor world. But in order to be an ancestor, you have to be uh, an elder. One is not an elder just because he's older. So with certain things he have to do. So when one transition, he's forever remembered for the things that he did while he was here. So that's why they equate You see where some of the traditions equate uh, spirit or ancestors to spirit or spirit to memory or thought.
Exactly. And so even in modern funerals, um, usually when a person passes um, at a funeral, they will have family or friends will give good words about the person, but they're giving memories about the person to in burn them and instill them in the minds of the people who are present there, so that when the person is buried in the ground, that they'll walk away in the minds of people. And as long as that person is in the minds of people and remembered, that person lives on. But listen, and I'm not, like I said, we could have a full conversation about this. So a lot of times, if I mention it and this is not the primary topic of discussion, then I try to summarize. But this is the thing: every single thing in existence, um, comes into existence from an undifferentiated state. In other words, if you look up the word definition, the definition of definition, it has to do with limiting, putting a limiter around something. And so if everything was everything, then everything would be nothing at the same time. The only way you get something is if you differentiate it from the next thing. Until that happens, that thing does not exist. And so when you demarcate one thing from another thing, that demarcation is giving it an identity. And that's what a name is. That's what a real name is. But now we put a form on it and we utter it. We'll say Steve, Bob, or whatever, and all the other kind of stuff. But the true identity of something is its demarcation from all other things. And so once, a thing comes into existence and then that demarcation goes away, it no longer exists except by way of its identity in the memory of people. And so your ancestors, or what we're calling our ancestors and everything, they live in your mind. So the so-called spiritual world is really the mind. Where your ancestors live is really in your mind. Now I know that may
Yep, yep.
sound
That's it.
a little bit over the top for some people, but trust
Man,
me,
that's
if we,
rational, man. That's logical. That's it's sound when you really, really think about it.
but I
Not
mean,
just the,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not just the ancestors, but those things that people think that, well, that people thought, they thought they were gonna take it with them, to the other world physically. It's like, no, they knew that it lived in the mind. Just like when we first got on, and I was saying, like, if I fall asleep listening to this show, and one time you're talking to what is his name? The one when you guys were, I forgot, you guys went live.
Rob Orn.
No, not Rob Bourne, but it was the dude,
Well, constant,
Kansu, yeah. And it kept saying his word, and I and he got the word wrong and what it meant, but the word came up so many times. What was it? Something with a D, but automatic.
Dichotomy.
Man, I went. Not, it wasn't dichotomy, was it? No.
Oh, I don't know. Oh,
Automatic.
Autodidact.
Yeah, man. I looked up the word a million times, still don't even understand what I read it. I was like, what? But I kept saying it in my sleep. In my sleep until I woke up in the morning. Didactic. And I was like, what? I just woke up laughing. Like, I was like, dude, what the fuck? But, my bad, Curtin. But, yeah, it's the same thing. Like, so many things. Like, when they say the universe is mental, you really can understand, like, what, I'm not sure if that's exactly what, but that's how it mostly is translated. Like, the universe is meant. You really can understand that and see why people had things buried sort of with them, but just because of the understanding that we really believed it I don't want to say believe, but you know what I mean by that, using that word loosely. You just took it with you, you know what I mean, to the astral plane of the duat or whatever. So yeah, and it makes you think about like, I think it's what is it? It's a story. I think it's in the coffin text or something where they, I think it's the Songs of the Harper or something like that. It sort of touches on that a little bit as well.
Yeah. Like I said, you know, that topic deserves a full blown discussion, you know. But, you know, to kind of squeeze it into a couple of statements that, you know, when you remember something, see, we do it all the time because they're think about it. Okay, think about this. Past, present, and future, right? We call ourselves living in the present, and the past is something that happened already, and the future is things that have yet to occur. But when you really think about it, we're only experiencing right now. And so you know, these are discussions that probably need to have, you know, and unfold. But if you ask yourself, what makes you you? Like, really? And see, these are discussions I have that people, I'm telling you, listen, that's why I say I could
Let's say
talk.
your experiences.
Okay. So if they're your experiences, so now if your experiences make you you, then what about those people who suffer from what's called amnesia? Suppose you forgot all of your experiences. Are you now a different person? Are you no longer you? If your experiences make you you, and then you lose them, are you still you?
No, that just means that their experiences don't make up you. That's all that means. You gotta start all over.
So you're not you anymore. So
Yeah,
you're
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 not new,
you're you're
Mhm.
you're a subtotal of your experiences. And so
right?
now this is the thing. If that's the case, because you know we just talking. If if that's the case, then when you go to sleep at night, this gonna sound funny, right? But now this is how I have conversation with atheists, people who want to, you know, make fun of the afterlife and all this other kind of stuff, right? All human beings, we need sleep. We have to sleep. There's no human being alive that will not get any sleep and stay alive. You're gonna die if you don't get any sleep. So we all sleep. Now, when you're asleep, you're not conscious. But when you wake up, why is it that you can go to sleep and be completely unaware, completely unconscious, and then resurrect from that unconscious state and still be you?
Because your memories are still
Memory.
intact.
Okay. But you transition from being conscious to completely unconscious, unaware, back to conscious, and yet you remain you. All right. So I'm saying, because I'm trying to give little hints for a future conversation, because what this is gonna start to
Yeah.
explain, what is gonna start to explain, is why these certain rituals occurred and why the names are so important and why sleep is always said to be the sister of death. Because listen, we only live right here, right now, and what makes us us is the faculty within us to be able to grab behind us our experiences and keep them in the here and now. Keep them in the here and now. Constantly do that. We constantly do that. That faculty that we do it naturally is what creates this sense of person, the person. And the
Yeah.
person is governed by what people call in Egypt the Ka, and this person becomes his personality, because how you behave and how you act is a result of your experiences that you are capable of packing up and keeping them current with you in the here and now. And so this is why the Ka is called a sustained configuration of energy. That's the reality behind it. Sustained meaning the same thing as a piano, the sustain pedal. What a sustain pedal on a piano does is it holds the note. It keeps the note going. So a sustained configuration of energy is the ability to sustain your experiences. And those experiences are expressed and it's called a personality. This is why people translate Ka as personality or spirit as personality. But anyway, like I said, that's for a whole
Question.
another context. But go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So if your experiences, uh, or the ones that you remember, or if your experiences make you you, so now the question is, well, because you don't necessarily remember all your experiences, and then the next question is, because then are you like incomplete person? And then the next question is, if it's your experiences, what about the experiences you have in your dream state? You know, are those part of what makes you you? Because dreams sometimes can be like they're not like they're not really based on reality stuff. So that's just another question that I'm kind of like wondering, like, would those be packaged as well under what the experiences that make you you, or would that be different? Or do you abandon your experiences when you sleep, and then does that mean you become totally another person when you sleep, and then you come back to your other you, wake up?
No, listen. See, that's what I said. That's see these type of things we gonna have a future conversation, but that's good. But no, what's happening is we have to remember that there are two yous, and I say it that way on the surface level. But if to dig deeper, there is the self, and then there's the person, and so the person is what I'm talking about. The person produces a personality. The personality is a result of the holding on to or sustaining of a configuration of energy. And people like to play with the word emotions as energy and motion and stuff. So this is the emotional body that we go through life experiencing, because we get our experiences from our emotions. We happy, we glad, we're joyful, we're sad, we're depressed, we're angry, we're anxious, and all this other kind of stuff. These experiences define who people are. They shouldn't, but that's what they do. And we hold on to these things and we identify those, so that becomes our identity, instead of identifying with the self, which is just an observer of all those things. The real essence of us is as the ultimate perceiver, the observer. We're not really angry. We're not really hungry. It's the person that becomes angry, the person that becomes hungry. And so, like, people like Professor Small, Professor James Small, when you hear him say things like, or when other people say things like, "I am a divine being having a human experience," that's what they mean when they say stuff like that. They're saying that the real essence of us is the observer going through the experiences of the person. And the Egyptians understood this, and they had a multi-level layered human being. Human being was not just this one thing. It was composed of multiple things that had different functions, and the Ka is one of them. The Ka and the Kaibit, which is a word for shadow, which is really talking about the animal part of us, the part of us that allows us to move, where we get the word animate, animal, animation, the ability to move, anima. And by the way, they translate anima as soul. That's where the confusion starts, because people translate Ba as soul, but then the Kaibit, they don't have no place for that. But it's literally a shadow or a fan that casts a shade on the physical body. But that was a metaphor for what causes the body the ability to have the ability to move on its own volition.
Sabo, you read The Nine Eyes of Light?
No. No.
Yeah, it touches on all of the bodies that the Remich had. I just made it home. I'm gonna go in and get the book, but it touches on all those bodies that the Remich had, and it goes through full detail and everything that you explain. And this is how I can't remember the author name of it, and it's not the complete name of the book, but I know it's the Nine Eyes of Light and something I can't remember right offhand. I read it. I actually bought the book when we these discussions that we having now. We had these discussions in 2015.
Yep.
We
5 years
was
ago.
yep 5 years ago, and I kind of got pretty deep in it, and I liked when we had these discussions and we talked. I kind of fell off of it, but I remember just a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. They detail that a lot in that Nine Eyes of Light book, man. Um,
All right. So
I
yeah,
just
when
can't
you
remember the
when you
author.
see it, yeah, drop the author and everything, cause I
Yeah,
probably did read it, cause it sounds familiar, but I don't think that's the title though.
I'm finna go in the house now. I'll get it when I get in
Okay.
the house.
But
And,
along those lines, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and when you talk about like what did you say, the real you, and I don't want to misquote you. What did you say?
Well, I was saying that there's on the surface, I just say there's two yous, but there's really one you, and then there's another not you that you identify as you. So instead
Right,
of saying that, I just there's the self and the person.
right, and that's how I look at it, like, because it's this subconscious, and I think Emike was sort of talking about it. Like when you go to sleep, I think a lot of that is like what they refer to as like your subconscious memory, which is a lot stronger than your conscious memory, because the conscious memory is easily programmed. You might not even know it, but then when you go to sleep, it's the like I don't even want to give too many examples, but I was watching something, and maybe you guys, I'm gonna make it quick, you guys probably saw it. Like a guy pulled up to an ATM and he found what they call a cassette, and you fill the money up, and he pulled up to it and he just picked it up, and it was $40,000 in it. Well, he thought it said 40,000, so he turned it in. So I go to the ATM 2 days ago and I see a cassette for the ATM, and it was just sitting on the table, right? And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But long story short, I didn't take it, right, because just where I was at by the University of Maryland. But anyway, it's crazy how it happened, and a lot of times that happens. Like you sort of attract things that you subconsciously. So like I know that's what you were sort of referring to in terms of those mystical, or what you could refer to as like the mystical teachings, like that the Remich used, like in what they were trying to do in terms of programming or sort of playing on their subconscious mind, if you will, and what in terms of what that transformation that was sort of happening. I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at when you were saying it was kind of two U's, and then you kind of referred to the, I don't know if you said rituals or what words you use, just kind of talking about the different so-called spells that they use and that they went over, and those rituals that they might have used, and the things, how it sort of transformed them. Or maybe I'm not sure if they were trying to merge. Would you say that they were trying to merge or make it one? Those two thems or the two yous, trying to balance them out in some sort of way by using those rituals? Would you say that?
No, they weren't merging them. They understood that they serve a purpose, and so just like a machine, like a car, there's car. The car we call a whole vehicle, a vehicle or a car, but it's made of components like the human body. The physical part of the human body, the physiological makeup of the human being, is really made up of 37.2 trillion cells, or we call them, we have organs, the heart, the lungs, these major organs and stuff like that. They all work together and they have different functions and things as a whole. And so they're not trying to make these things one in that sense. They're one in terms of a unit. And so this is where you get the concept of what do you call it? Unity and multiplicity going on at the same time. And this is the rule of existence, period, where you have this one to many relationship. And the one part of it is very elusive and imperceptible. And in Egyptian language, they call that aspect, or that aspect of existence, this very elusive and imperceivable aspect of existence, they call it Amen. And Amen means hidden.
So it's sort of like they were kind of gradually using it to gradually lead their mind to like deeper and deeper levels of perception of like truth, until they got to the sort of what they considered the Amen, or the absolute truth, you would say.
Well, they could. Well, if we wanted to call any god a mystery god that has a permanent status of mystery, it would be Amen. In terms of Egypt, Kemet, because Amen can never be known, ever. The name Amen, they translate as hidden, but it also means, a more precise meaning would be imperceivable. That's not changing. So there's an aspect of existence that will forever be imperceivable. And when I elaborate on it, I demonstrate it with an image of an eyeball. If you were an actual eyeball, that would mean that you could see everything around you except for yourself. An eyeball can never see itself, but yet it can see everything else. And so you would call that aspect of never being able to see yourself, Amen, imperceivable. You will never, ever be able to see yourself, because you are the object of perception. You are the instrument that is doing the perceiving. Therefore, you cannot perceive yourself. And existence, the way that these indigenous people categorize existence, this is an issue of ontology, really, and taxonomy. How they categorize and organize existence. And so there's an aspect of existence that will never, ever be perceived. And the word that covers that is Amen in Egypt. So if anybody want to talk about this mystery God, it would be the forever mysterious one. Amen. So did the Egyptians believe in a mystery God? The answer is yes. But it's just not what people think it is, though. It's a mystery, meaning it's imperceivable, because that's what the name is. Even the other deities, like when you read the hymn to Amen Ra or Amen, in there it will tell you that even the other Netcheru do not know the form of Amen, his true name, and all this other kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's there. Yeah, I see that book Kofi. Yeah, that's the one that
You
I thought you
read
were
this?
talking about. Yeah.
Can I give just the name of some of the chapters in the book?
Yeah, out of context. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the physical body, which is the cat scanning the body for healing, a whole bunch of different things, but it just is talking about the cat, the physical body. Then chapter 2, it talks about the Ren, which is name and form, sound, vibration, creation. 3, the Shu, the shadow. 4, the Sekim, the power, the life, force, the bliss.
But hey, go back to the shoot. Shoot. Just so people know.
Oh, shoot, the shadow. Yeah, the shadow, chapter 3.
Yeah. The other Egyptian word for that is kaibit. Just so people know what I was talking about earlier. But go ahead.
Yeah, the Shekim power, that's chapter 4, life force. 5, the Ka, the double, your double, the ab.
Wait. No, notice how they say double, and what I say it was. I remember I said it was 2 U's.
Yep.
They say it's the double, and I was saying it's the Ka. Mm-hmm. Ka is a sustained configuration of energy. It is the container by which you store your experiences, and these are outwardly expressed as your behavior and so-called personality. But go ahead.
Yeah, the ear, the heart, the human heart. Chapter 7.
That's actually the mind, though.
It had what this had the mind over here. Yeah, it don't have the mind. It says the human heart on here, but yeah, it's the mind. Cause what is the word for
Hati,
what is it?
Hati,
Hati, yeah, hati, yeah,
Hati is the human heart, and Ib would be the
hati.
mind, the seat of
Yeah,
consciousness.
yeah. Then it has chapter 7, the Ba, the soul, um, the Sahu, the immortal body, the light inform. Chapter 9, the Aku, the shining one, and 10, the holographic interface.
That first one you said that was, I never even thought about that. The cot or like cat. Were you making that? Were they making that reference in the book in terms of like the connection between like a CAT scan and the cot, or
I don't know because see, when they have the cat here, the physical body, then it has up under it has like different sections within the chapters. It has the cat scanning the body for healing. So
well, okay,
Nah, they
yeah, I'm
plan.
pseudo then because that's deep.
No, they playing on the word. That's all.
Okay,
That's not that's not serious. It's just an interesting wordplay because the cot is the human body. That's the physiological 37.2 trillion cells body. That's what rots. And when you see the word in the glyphs, is the last glyph in that word is a fish. And they did that because the human body rots and it smells just like a rotten fish, like any dead carcass does.
and it's an egg too, right? And that when you spell that out, isn't it a egg in there? Then
What it may be a variation, but it's the
okay.
determinative will be a fish on there. Fish, cot. So that's the body, but the shut is as a word for fan, and the fan is a shadow, and it also is known as a kaibit, and that's the animating aspect of the human, which gives us the ability to move on our own volition.
Now I know they tell like sometimes what kind of fish. Is it a catfish?
No, it's not a catfish.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Nah, because cat is not. We're pronouncing it cat like cat, but it's chat. It's a totally different word. It's the same last consonant as the word unk. It's not the same. So we don't do that. Totally different word. But yeah. So I'm just saying these things. So this is what people gotta understand. But I think we kind of stepped outside of the importance of nomenclature, but at the same time, I just want to remind people that this is the importance of defining these terms and being very specific to eliminate ambiguity. And so when we talk about spirit, you're not going to get anywhere until you do this. We talk about soul. All these words I mentioned: soul, spirit, spiritual, spirituality, religion, religiously, religiosity or whatever. All these different words: belief, believe, worship, devotion, veneration, praise, prayer. Do you pray? But like, yeah, I ask for a lot of things. Pray means to ask. But what people mean is that do you pray to something that you yourself have accepted without any demonstration for? That's what they're asking you.
Speaking of that, about praying and something that you don't have demonstration of, like we realize the word belief, because I know when we hear people using it nowadays, it's almost like a negative connotation, like, oh, some people believe. But then within this conversation, then you realize that there's nothing wrong with having believing in things, because you see with every culture, I mean, with everything, and as humans, there's some things that we know, and then there's some things that we do not know. So even like when you're going over the whole case with what we could define as mysterious God, like with Amun, that is something that's put under the category of something that we cannot perceive, so we do not know much about it. In that sense, and you see that's you have to have a place for that kind of stuff. So, but within the conversations we have, it almost seems like it's wrong to have things that we believe in. But then when you break down what the word mean, you realize that as humans, there are stuff that we do believe in by default, as in there are things that we do not know. So we put them on that, but we accept them as they are. That we do not know about them, so we put them on that in that folder or that file system of things we do not know. So we might as well we just believe in, and then the things that we know, and those are the things that we can define and be scientific about. We say, but how when people talk is like everything has to be known, and if you believe, then that's not good.
Right. Well, see, this is the thing. Every human being, we operate in a range, but we go between belief and knowledge every single day and every day of our life for the duration of our life. And so the difference between classifying different human beings based on that is you have people who are not settled on being ignorant or not knowing versus those who seek to know. And that's really what it boils down to, because we don't know everything, but some people are satisfied with not knowing certain things. And so there's a ratio that everybody lives by. Everybody has beliefs, everybody, and everybody has knowledge, but it's the ratio that makes the difference. And so some people are satisfied with a higher ratio on the belief side versus the knowledge side, and some people need a higher ratio on the knowledge side than the belief side. That's what makes the different categories of people. So when they say you're religious minded, that tends to lean towards people who have a higher ratio or higher percentage of belief comfortability. They're comfortable.
Okay, gotcha.
They're comfortable in that. But everybody has a percentage of belief. And every single scientist starts off in beliefs. A scientist, when a scientist and let's say a scientist and a believer, those are two people. Person A is the believer, person B is the scientist. When they start off on the starting block, they're both equal. They're both in a state of ignorance. The difference is that the scientist will run to the finish line seeking to know and won't finish until they know, whereas a believer will give up the race and be satisfied with just not knowing, and they accept it. That's the difference. But they both start out the same. It's their destinations are different. Their starting points are the same. A scientist will start off with ignorance. They're seeking to know. They'll ask questions. They'll form a hypothesis. They'll give hunches and stuff. And then they start to test, to eliminate error, to falsify. And then whatever comes out in the wash, now they know. That's the scientific method. Okay, I'm hearing echo. Yeah. So now they know. And so science is a set of tools and methods to allow a person to know when something's known. And with that, let me just share this real quick. Let's look at the word learn. This is something that people may not be aware of. The word learn. This is what the word, its historical evolution. The word learn comes from a prehistoric West Germanic, and I'm going to butcher these pronunciations, so I'm not even going to try. Y'all could just read with me. Learn comes from a prehistoric West Germanic reconstructed word, which also produced the German lernen. This goes back ultimately to an Indo-European lies, which means track, and so seems to carry the underlying notion of gaining experience by following a track. I want that to stick in everybody's head. To learn something is to gain experience of that something by tracking it. Okay? Very closely related are terms in various Germanic languages for teach. German lehrerin, for instance, and Dutch lering, Swedish Laura, Danish Leah. Okay, there you go. Which the last three also mean to learn. English used to have such a verb for teach, also called lere. It had largely died out by the 19th century, but the related lore knowledge survives. So the word lore, folklore, it means folk knowledge or a folk learning. So that's where learn comes from. And so what a believer is different from a scientist is that a believer is satisfied by not following a track to experience the thing, whereas a scientist seeks out to track something by way of the scientific method and all the other kind of stuff that leads them to know when they know. A believer is satisfied with not knowing. And that's the big difference. And so we have people in the world that fall in variations of those percentages. You know, you're not all one or the other, but it's just that you're a percentage of each. That's what it boils down to.
It makes me think about when sometimes people talk about, well, I say myself, when I think about school or universities, I used to always say like it really kills your creativity. But then on the other end of that, I see why you can't just stay outside of structure, because school, it's a track, it's structured, and you need that to sort of have a basis for all of the things that you learn outside outside of the academic arena. So you can learn all of this, and then once you take it into some sort of scholarly institution or school, because that's what it feels like a lot of times when I'm listening, like, okay, this is just like, this is just like college or like, school in some sort of way, because it's structured. So it's fine to color outside of the lines, but then you got to learn how to sort of start just structuring, I guess. I can't really think of another word, but just making sure that everything makes sense, right? Using that sort of scientific method based off of all of your ideas or your so-called beliefs, and you put it to, like you say, you put it to a test to see if it's true, like just like we were sort of going off of some of the sesh words, like drink is like baba, and just so many different words, right? But then when you study linguistics or language, you can follow the track and see if that's true or if it's just something that happens to be something that just sounds alike. You know what I mean? So it just makes me think about that. Like a lot of people say, oh, school can kill your creativity and put you in this sort of a box or whatever. But in a way, you see, it's just a delicate balance that you do have to use your beliefs, and then you do have to use some structured ideas as well. And then I think it's just a matter of finding that delicate balance within the two, not wanting to lean too far in one way and not wanting to lean too far on the other side.
Well, even to know that you're coloring outside the lines, you still have to learn where the lines are. So there's no way around it. That's what people are going to have being for a rude awakening. Any progress is made by people just accepting reality where it is. You got to be honest with your own strengths and weaknesses, your pros, your cons, your strengths, your weaknesses, and things like that. That's the only way that people really, really advance on a personal level. And that's where character comes into play. The building up of character is the ability to know yourself, your limitations, and your strengths. Because where you're strong at, you allow other people to lean on you for that. Where you're weak at, you'll know to lean on others for that. And then the human community will allow the leaning back and forth. You can lean on something. And that's what forms a community. That forms this network, this web called a community, where people lean on each other and they come together as a body of people leaning on each other to solve the collective problems, and that becomes culture. So a group's culture is how a group solves their problems, using all kinds of things, but that's ultimately what they're coming together to do. For the advancement, survival of the participants, members of the community or the culture, is only done and performed by solving problems. And that's what culture is. Solving problems. And people solve problems differently. They see things differently. And so all throughout human history, you have cultures that come and go, civilizations that come and go, because new problems arise that they're not able to adjust to. It's almost like the human body. When pathogens come into the body, you form antibodies for it against the antigens. And so you have cultural immune systems that fail sometimes, and then the civilization of the culture dies. Egypt had a long run. Egypt died. A lot of cultures came and they died. They couldn't sustain the immunity, which means they couldn't solve the problems, the new problems that arise. So no culture is ever going to stay stuck on any one thing and survive. So when people say, I'm gonna do what my ancestors did and this and that, they got to be careful with that, because tradition shouldn't imprison you. It should inspire you. What your predecessors and ancestors did should inspire you, but not imprison you. You're not obligated to do exactly what other people did, because you don't know if that solves the current problems of today. But there's certain things in cultures that definitely do. That are what do you call it? Universals. These are things that permeate. They're timeless. They're not related to eras of time.
Right, and this is why when people talk about the African cultures and people on the continent not following or abandoning traditions and running through like Western modern stuff, whether it's the religion or just going through science and abandoning traditions, most people don't understand that the reason behind it, and that's because these traditions and these cultures at some point they've stopped serving the purpose of solving the problems. So then people start to look for other ways of or different aspects that can actually solve their current and immediate problems. So this is how you see all these cultures slowly collapsing.
Yes, and certain ones rising because they're solving problems of today,
Right,
like China.
Right.
Look at China. And so that's the thing we got to be aware of. But listen, none of this will happen effectively until we can get down to these simple things that we're talking about, like today. The previous stream, we were talking about nomenclature, the importance of nomenclature. If we can't even agree and see the importance of that, then it's no hope, because these are preliminary, fundamental things that need to be done before we even think about getting on these other topics of discussions and problem solving. You just can't do it. You can't do it. That's why people are arguing. And I feel people who see it as just senseless argument back and forth. But something has to change. And so that's what people, so hopefully people took away from the earlier live stream we just did. You take that away and try your best to share that and emphasize that to people the importance of nomenclature, the importance of slowing the conversations down. Of course, we don't have to define every word. Like you in a conversation on the street or your average conversation, no, it's not talking about that. It's talking about when a group of people get together and have any serious conversation about these issues, you're going to have to slow the conversation way down and go through that process. Otherwise, don't even do it. You're wasting your time. It's a waste of time. If somebody mentions spirituality, pump the brakes. Get a working definition from them, and then now you know what they're referring to. Then you can participate and navigate through that conversation. And you all will know the words that are important to do that for. God is man. I think people got godophobia. They scared of the word God. I don't believe in God. They think it's belittling them. I did an experiment. I said, okay, if God equals existence, do you have a problem with God? And people couldn't even just answer me. They like, well, first you got to prove God. I'm like, I'm declaring God to be existence. I'm initializing God as existence. Now, do you have a problem with God? Well, first you gotta, the burden of proof is on you. You gotta prove that a God exists. I'm like, God is existence itself. I'm like, man, I can't win. Oh boy.
Yeah, that conversation was very interesting because it's like my takeaway from it is that uh, people are, we can talk about in um, you know, white man science. We can talk about colonizers, all these things, but then you realize that everything we do, and we are that. And even though people don't want to admit it, because in that conversation alone, I know that when you read African history, you will see like when the Europeans first came to Africa, they had issues trying to understand these different cultures and their belief systems and all that kind of stuff. So and what happens is what we see with the missionaries and colonizers and slavery and all that is just people imposing their way of life on other cultures. So now the interesting part is when you actually made that post, and you would what I observed was exactly the same thing. And this is from a group of people who will rebuke all these European ways and things like that, but they display those characters because you declare what you define as God, but they have an issue with that, and they would like you to define it in a way that makes it that they understand it in the, in their perspective, instead of actually just saying, okay, if that's what you declare God is existence, then yeah, I accept that. But even just that simple declaration, they could not accept. And to me, that was like a play is just a play out of what the Europeans did in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not going to try to understand what you believe in, but I can give you something to believe in.
Well, that's projection. A lot of people do that. And a lot of people answer questions outside of themselves. They project and they answer questions as if they're not a participant in the conversation. And I always point that out to people. They answer as if they're projecting. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with their own mind, to where they literally live vicariously through other people's minds. And we know this to be a tendency, a very popular one, because this is what propels celebrities and entertainers. A lot of people live their life vicariously through entertainers and celebrities, which is why they support celebrities so much. They're willing to spend a lot of money for and to people they don't even know. These celebrities do not know you, but yet these people will support celebrities and live through them. And so even on a smaller level in conversations, people do that on a very small scale. They will live through another person's mind by projection instead of dealing with their own mind, their own thoughts, figuring out, why do I actually like this? Do I like it because that was the only options I had back in the day? Or do I really like it? What does it mean to like something? Wow. See, people don't want to go through all that stuff. And I saw somebody earlier mention meditation in the chat. I lost where it was. But meditation is a very good tool. It's a tool, and people got to understand it to be a tool, but it's a very good tool to start to experience and get to know these different aspects of why and how you think the way you do and stuff like that. It's like the ultimate me time when people meditate and they do it properly. But that's a whole nother conversation. But meditation is always good. I don't know what the statement was. I think I can't scroll back far enough now. But yeah, so I'm gonna start wrapping it up. Does anybody else have any comments, anything you want to bring up while we here?
You know about that God thing. I think it's an issue of people getting caught up in labels. You put yourself in a label, and then somebody asks you a question, and it makes sense, and then now you gotta, kind of question the label you put on yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because people identify with words or information, and so instead of not doing that, they do that, and they fear of that label sticking with them. Because you gotta understand, in the so-called conscious community, being religious is a negative thing. Spooky, religious, you're nuts, you're pseudo, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people that are saying that are just as religious, just as pseudo as those that they're pointing the finger at. And we can make a case for that. Yeah.
It's the matterer. I had to drop off and go. I wanted to just call back and thank you again for allowing me to share and for sharing with me. I do have some questions, and I promise I won't be long winded because it's I'm in Arizona. It's 12:13 or so here. If you guys
Okay, we got 15 minutes, so go ahead. You can shoot.
Okay, cool. Okay. In physics, it has been discovered that observing a wave turns it into a particle. I don't know the proper terminology, but are you familiar with that research?
If you're talking about the split theory, the split particle theory, where if you don't observe it, it'll have what they call it this wave and this convergence of the wave on this medium after the element is split into two slits. It's the two slit.
The double slit experiment.
Yeah, the double.
They call it waveality or something like that.
Okay, so people are generally familiar with the idea that an observer cannot fully understand the phenomenon because by observing the phenomenon, its character changes. And my question is, are there any discernible implications for language in your mind, and how would you deal with that in the context of language?
No, language is a function of communication. Okay, so a language is a set of signs, and I already showed and shared what those are. We use it to transmit concepts from mind to mind. So your job is to fully give a person a piece of your mind. Like we use that playfully in everyday talk. Like, boy, I'm gonna give you a piece of my mind. Like you're gonna tell somebody off. But literally, communication as a whole endeavor is the function of giving people a piece of your mind. So
okay.
that's something totally different than what you're saying. In terms of the split theory and observing and stuff like that.
Yeah. Let me try to clarify. I'm okay. So I'm trying to discern what appears to be feeling in language, right? I feel you. You say, give me a piece of your mind. That implies a thing, right? Peace implies a thing, right? This is obviously we can discuss different aspects of it, but there's something there that I don't have a language to describe. There's something happening there. You say, give someone a piece of their mind. I understand completely what you're saying, but I can't explain it myself what just happened. All I can say is we've understood, we've come to terms, we've done these things, and you could probably come up with 100 other ways to describe it, but something has happened that's difficult to put into words. And when I read some information about, you know, an observer changing a wave to a particle, I see some similarity there, but I just lack the language to make any sense of it. So it sounds like gibberish coming from, you know, from me.
Well, see, yeah, it's gonna take. See, I limited the conversation earlier to the nomenclature piece, and I just briefly covered the word part of it because I did a video on the word before, and this is something that I teach in the grammar course when dealing with the Egyptian language, because there's certain things you have to know, and so I go into more details with that. But even when you say a thing, you have to understand that okay, so let's take what we all learned in grade school. We learned the parts of speech, right? And we learned about nouns, prepositions, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Those are the basic ones. And what do they define a noun as?
Person, place, or thing.
Or idea.
Or idea.
Right. So these are really substantives, because a noun is a nomen, it's a name. It's from the Latin word nomen, which means name. And remember what I said earlier, that when you name something, essentially what you're doing is you're creating a symbol for the demarcation of an entity to distinguish it from other entities. So it becomes a thing, or it becomes a substantive. But it doesn't have to be tangible, feelable, to be able to make contact with it through the five senses at all for it to be a substantive. So we got to be careful when we say thing, because originally the word thing meant time.
What do you mean when you say it doesn't have to be in contact with the five senses? How do you mean that?
Meaning that like love, where's love? That's a noun. That's a substantive. But where is it?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty abstract thing. But at the same time, when a person thinks of love, whatever their experience has been in terms of the action itself, which is sometimes there's a general understanding of that, but each person will have their subjective symbol of that, which will probably involve some subconscious memory that they have that acts as the template for the rest of it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but at the same time, what I'm saying, my point though, is that a noun is a substantive. A noun is called a noun from the Latin grammar nomen, which is a name. To give a thing a name is to bring it into existence. And when you name something, to bring it to existence, what you're doing is that you're demarcating it from the ocean of undifferentiatedness. And so, like, if we had more time, we would have to structure this conversation in a very precise labeling system. And this is what
I understand what you're saying right there. I mean, like when you see draw it out of, I understand all that. I got what you're saying.
No, I'm saying, but it's for everybody else listening too. So like in ancient Egypt and in many cultures, but in Egypt, because that's what we primarily deal with, a lot of people are familiar with the concept or the deity Nu or Nun. And Nun is likened unto an ocean of water, the watery deep, the chaotic waters, undifferentiated waters. It's metaphorized as water because of the behavior of actual water, but it's not literally water. But every single thing in existence comes out of Nu or Nun. And when it comes out of Nu or Nun, it receives an identity, which means it receives a differentiation, because Nu itself is undifferentiated, infinite, and eternal. And to move from that state into a state of reality, you have to differentiate yourself, or whatever that thing is has to differentiate itself. So you move from being undifferentiated to being differentiated. And that's the definition of definition, which is set a limiter around something to demarcate that from something else. And that is the process of gaining an identity, which is symbolized by a name. And so a nomen or substantive is a reflection of that process. So all I'm saying is that we got to be careful of, even when we say things. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I
Things.
get it. I'm right there with you, and I struggle. Yeah, it's very interesting to try to craft a thought in that manner that you just did. If you carry with you the idea that the observer changes a wave to a particle, right? Some, I don't. That might sound crazy. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but I appreciate you engaging with that.
If you don't mind me saying so, one way to look at that, prior to knew that the great God out of which, or enter out of which everything is supposed to, including new, is supposed to be new is supposed to be an expression of Aminu or new or Iman, or some people call him Iman. And so Iman, the very name itself means uncertainty, which is pretty much what you're talking about. The new is just another expression of that. In that, but it's dealing with the going into a wave type situation. But when it's coming out of it, like the brother said, it's coming out of a form of Amen that is in new, and in the form that he is in within new is Atun, and when it comes out of new, that's Keperu, and that's form Keperi, and that's where Keperu, these forms that he's talking about, comes out of. So this goes back to what you were asking about the expression of particles. So one of those Keperu would be a particle, and then from that particle, other things can build up on that. So anyway,
yeah, I appreciate that. I am trying to, in my mind, create a different pattern of thought. So if you imagine a person born in English and that's all they know, then their mind is necessarily rigid to the extent that English is rigid. This can produce difficulty in learning another language. Further they would go outside of the Latin tradition, the harder necessarily it might be perceived. And
Well,
so if you go ahead.
I was gonna say it's gonna take time, because what you just now said is really, you're changing a paradigm, and a paradigm is a complete shift, and that's
Yes.
gonna take time. So you
Yes.
so you got to be patient and flexible while you're going through the shifting until your whole paradigm shifts. So that's where people need to be and need to understand. That's what you're describing.
Yep.
So you got to do that. But Rasan, earlier, I don't know, I guess you weren't here, but we had discussed Amen, and in terms of how you mentioned it, we were talking about that, how Amen, as a deity, the word itself means, they translate as hidden, but it's more finally translated as imperceivable, and it's the imperceivable aspect of existence itself that's called Amen.
yeah. In modern terms, I use the term uncertainty, and that's helped me kind of build an entire, you know, um, theoretical framework, to be honest with you, on how we should be kind of addressing or approaching this, but I agree with
Well,
you on that.
yeah,
I'm sad. I missed it earlier. I wish I had been here. Sorry about that,
yeah.
man.
Well, no, because we were framing it up because nu or nun is undifferentiated, infinite, and eternal, and anything that has those properties, it would be imperceivable because it has no form. It's formless. It has no differentiation to even have a form. Therefore, without a form, it can't be perceived. You can only perceive something if it has a form. And so Amen, as a deity, even in the hymn to Amen and the hymn to Amen Ra and all that, the hymns plural, they talk about the formlessness of Amen and the fact that the
Right.
other Netcheru don't even know
Right.
Amen's true
Right.
form or his name. And the word
Right.
Ren is identity. And it goes back to what I was saying, that an identity, the name is married to identity. The identity is an encircled, um, for lack of a better word, thing. an
Yeah, I get
encircled
what you're saying.
an encircled thing. Right.
Yeah.
No, I'm just repeating it for everybody else.
Yeah.
An encircled thing. And so we create these things, and that circle itself is called a shen. It's also called a ren, and as far as the identity, but then the actual structure of it being surrounded by something is called jer or jur. And so in Egypt, they had a person who owned all the jurs, all of the boundaries, all of these limits called definitions, and it was called
Mm-hmm.
Neb-Ercher, the Lord with respect to these limits. Neb-Ercher, they call the deity Neb-Ercher. They call him, that's the supreme being, and this the supreme being that talks about how forms come into being. And so the word Keper is used because the word Keper, it means to manifest. It means to come into being. And so the process describes the process of coming into being, which is what the scarab beetle shows in the iconography. When you see the sun disk in front of the beetle, it's not there to push the sun. It's there to bring the sun into existence, because beetles only push things with their back legs, not the front. And so the beetle uses their head and the sharp elements of their mouth and head to actually form the sphere or the ball of the dung, the dung from the mass. And so this mass of dung, it is symbolic of the infinite undifferentiated aspect. And then when they carve a sphere out of it, it brought it into existence by creating limits around it. It just happened to be spherical in shape. And that's what it's being represented. That's what the word means. It means to come into existence. And so that's where you see all these different things, Nu or Nun, and then you have Ra, and you have Keper. Atum, the word Atum means to complete. Atum is the completion of one stage leading into another. So like I said, all these things, like, see, we can explain it if we stay within Kemet, because Kemet creates its own nomenclature. It creates its own structured, precise labeling. But when
Right.
people crisscross things, they have to be able to recreate that structure, though. Like, it's okay. Like, we could bring all that stuff into the modern physic language of physics and talk about, energy. We could switch words, but we have to create that and maintain that same rigid structure, though, to be able to fully understand it. And a lot of people are not prepared to do that, or even think that's even necessary to do. So that's what people have to understand. I'm just trying to catch up with the track, because I don't want to stay on too long. We've been on here for 3 hours now, so I'm about to shut it down. I see Priestess Raul. I thought I saw a comment or question. Oh, please do more of these. I really like the show. Okay. Oh, and she's leaving out. Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. So if y'all see something, but yeah, anything that, because I'm trying to wrap up, so I don't want to begin a conversation. So if anybody got anything to end with, or summarize, or whatever the case is. I know.
Well,
Okay.
go ahead.
No. Matter. Brother. Matter. He said he had questions. I thought he had another one, but my point to you, though, when you brought up that was that you're talking about a paradigm shift, but that's going to take time, and so you got to be patient and just roll with it a little bit, because as you replace one thing for another, you're going to have to do everything. And if you don't do it all at once, you got to understand that, okay, that's replaced, but that's not. That's replaced, but that's not.
And I think we've come to an understanding, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to produce unity of thought in such a manner that I can consider all possibilities at once. and it's very difficult to even come up with a structure that I can even think about that. And it may be an exercise in futility, but if something can come out of that that can be shared in English, that might be valuable.
Right. It can. It just takes time, and that's what we're dealing with in the language. See, because a culture does that. A culture, and this is the danger, or the what do you call it, the vulnerability that people create when they mix cultures, when they cherry pick from India culture, Chinese culture, African, certain African groups culture, and things like that. When they cherry pick like that, they run the risk of you know being less effective at doing what you were saying. But if you stick with one and kind of get that under your belt, at least you'll have something to work with to be able to say, okay, let me just shift this whole paradigm. And so Egypt offers a very, very good model because they actually outline a lot of things that are very well structured and precise.
Yeah, this is where this idea comes from. Trying to understand the concept of the opening of the way, or an opening of a way, and where it can be applied and what can be extracted. So, for example, if I say one thing, or if I introduce a concept into a conversation, then there's all sorts of things that come along with it that are implied, that are assumed, that are all these things. And this produces confusion, and it can open the way to conflict, right? This is what we were talking about on the other YouTube. And it's a very complex and interesting thing to think about. So I appreciate you engaging on that level.
Well, now to help prevent it though, is that you have to know how to bring, you have to know what to pack into the form. And that's the best that we can do, because you can't control the receiver's mind. So like if you're talking to somebody, you can't control what they're gonna think. You know how they say you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But it's our responsibility to pack as much info in the vehicle when we dish it off to them that we can. And so this is where people got to become better communicators, and in a complete environment. And I'm talking about just like having a conversation. But if you're in an environment of a topic and you're studying something or whatever the case is, then the very least that people could do is create a precise language for it, which is called nomenclature. And that's what we were talking about. We have to. We have to. And we gave a lot of examples today, especially with the word spirit. A lot of people will use it, but they don't understand the other person may not be on the same page. You're not speaking the same language. Even though we're uttering the same sounds, and we like to call that English, we could be talking about a different thing. And this is where you get exoteric and esoteric differentiations within the same culture using the same language. Because like, I'll give you an example. A Freemason can say some things to you in the English language, but you will have no idea what they're talking about, even though they're using words that you are familiar with, but you still don't know what they mean, what he means by it, because they're using the forms of English words, but they're pointing to different conceptualizations, and you just don't know it because you don't have that sign in your mind. And so Freemasons recognize one another by what? Is Kofi still here? Nope. Anybody did any traveling or a Freemason will know that one Freemason.
I'm a traveler.
Okay, Freemasons recognize each other by what? Signs and tokens.
Signs and symbols.
Right, signs and tokens. So
right.
These signs is what I'm talking about. It's right there in your face.
Like if you said cable tow, people's mind might go to one thing.
Or anything. I'm just saying the
right.
the way that two brothers of the craft will recognize each other is by way of signs and tokens. And these signs are shared between the two brothers, but not in no one else. So they can communicate to each other, and people around them would be totally oblivious. Yeah, truth out there, special handshake is the token. So when we say signs and tokens by, those things, grips.
Can this be done in a way that is unspoken necessarily? And when I say unspoken, what I mean by that is undefined yet communicated. Can it arise organically? Like, I'll give you an example. Game, recognize game, or by Felicia. These are two understandings that people who share a certain culture and understand that culture completely and watch the movie Friday, and then they say when a similar situation or they use it in a certain type of way by Felicia, they know exactly what is meant. And no one has defined that.
They have pretty much, because what do you understand by what a language is? How would you define a language?
I would define a language as a structured vehicle for transmission of ideas, concepts, whether concrete or abstract, as a, just off the top of my head.
Well,
so
see,
you
that's
can have
it.
a computer
Right,
language.
That's the issue.
Yeah, but then so we did this structure, but then the other thing that a language must have is convention. So there's an agreed set of rules.
Yeah,
so what you explain, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So what you are explaining is that there are those rules that a group of people understand that a different set of other group of people might not necessarily understand. So that's what we mean by a language, because if you just say by Felicia and you're the only person who knew what it was or what it meant, that would not be a language. But as soon as there's there are rules of what that means, even though it might mean something else completely different somewhere else, like with what was shown in the presentation today. When you say by Felicia, people understand what is meant with that, and that's what makes it a language. So you have to have that set of agreed, where there's consensus on what this means for us.
Let me just share this again, because this is something that I've been talking about for a long time, but it is hard. It is something that's hard to wrap your mind around if you're not used to it. But people are going to really just have to get used to this, that you got to understand what a language is. A language is a set of signs that's shared by a group of people. And a sign consists of three things: form, meaning, and the link between the two. If you do not share a sign with another person, you're not participating in the phenomenon called language. So as Emiket said, if you're the only one that knows what by Felicia means, for example, then you're not speaking language. And only another person that has that sign in their mind will be able to understand what you mean when you say it. And so and
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so when you say game recognizes game, when you were saying that, can it be communicated unspoken or organically? What you're describing as organically or whatever is still language. It's still a form. Because, like, for example, deaf people don't communicate by way of sound patterns. They have sign language. Their concepts are wrapped in the vehicle of hand signals called sign language. People who write letters, they're not audible, but you put the concepts in a written pattern. Then you have people who are deaf, who have to use braille. I'm sorry, not deaf. I'm sorry, I said that already. Blind, who can't see the written pattern, but they can hear the sound patterns. And if something was written, they would have to use the braille. So what you're calling organic is still a language, because a husband and wife can go out to a public function, and because the husband and wife know each other so much, if something peculiar happens at the, let's say, a restaurant or somebody's party, the husband and wife could just look at each other and give a certain look to where they know what each other means and say. That's still
Signal,
language.
signifier.
Right. That's still a signal. That's a signifier, because you got the form. That's the form. And the only way that your husband or your wife will know what you mean by what you do is if they share the same sign in their mind. So language is the sharing of signs. Once a ratio of signs become different, you're speaking a different language. And there's a smooth gradient, because you have dialects of the same language first, and then once they become mutually unintelligible, I should say, then you're speaking a totally different language. And what that means is that you have a different sign in your mind. And that's all it is. Remember, language is an illusion, because the word elephant is not the elephant itself. It's just a signifier for the reality. That's it.
Yeah, we can go on and on. I appreciate this immensely. Thank everyone for indulging a stranger, a newbie, someone whose voice you have never heard before, and I can't say thanks enough.
Now we appreciate it. We looking for the interaction and stuff. So this is what we encourage. So we appreciate you showing up and participating, chiming in, and asking some really good questions. Yeah, definitely. But we want to wrap it up, so I want to make a round. So we're gonna start with Rasan. I know, Rasan, you say you didn't hear a lot of it, so I don't know what you could kind of give as a closing. But I guess you can make suggestions for some future conversations, though, or something. But I'm gonna start with you.
I wouldn't do that yet, but I will say that what I did notice early on when I got into this path, and I say this with high respect for our elders and stuff, like, who wrote books and things like that. But one of the things that I noticed early on was something you said, you just said, which is that basically, they're mixing in a whole lot of stuff from a lot of different cultures, and way back in '90, and about 92, 93, it's probably about 92. I was like, why are we doing that? If we're going to, if we, it just smacked of a bit of how do you say, a bit of and I say this with high respect. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, um, but a lack of confidence in the culture itself, that if we study it enough, that we can pull out something that is highly useful for our people, because the signs were all there. That these people did what they did, so they knew something that we could use today. But you know, um, I'm with you on the whole perspective that we need to focus on this culture, and not be bouncing all over the place with all these other cultures, and mixing them in and stuff. Because when we do that, we're giving our mental space to that, and don't get me wrong, I understand there are appropriate times to kind of have that conversation, but I think what you want to do first is understand what you got here in this system, you know, and you can only do that by studying it, with a bit of focus, so I'm with you on that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. Anybody else? Niwasara, you still up?
Yeah, I'm still here. I don't really have too much to say, other than I was just thinking, like, I'm not trying to just agree with everything. So I definitely agree that we shouldn't, I guess, amalgamate things that from different cultures, or like bring things, but it brings to mind some things I feel like were taken from the Kemetic culture and sort of expounded upon. So even like when we look into Greek things, or things that might have made it to like the Hindu culture, we can see the connection from Kemet, but they might have been expounded upon. So you definitely want to be careful doing it. So I definitely agree with that part. But some things I look at as they help us understand the Kemetic culture more, like when people refer to like different Greek people and stuff like that. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. But I don't want to throw every other culture out and what they're doing to say like it might like it's not fitting, because I see how some things are just expounded upon that come from Kemet, and it helps you even with things when we talk about quantum mechanics and quantum different branches of science. I see where you see the connection between things that the Ramet might have dealt with as well. So I'm not disagreeing. I'm just looking at it in a different way.
Well, I do agree. I do understand what you're saying. I mean, I don't want to give the wrong impression. As I've collected and researched all this stuff over the years, I have been, had situations where I gained a better understanding of something in Kemet by finding it somewhere else. But usually when I do that, I'll trace it to that culture, and then and once I confirm that they're connected, and I'm pretty sure of that, then I go from there. For instance, um, um, uh, uh, Geb is connected to oh goodness, what's the word? Just because I'm trying to tell you now, I'm going blank now, and I don't want to waste the time. But there are different things that you can learn from that. My problem is when we're not when we get stuck in that and we're just pulling it in there so much that we're talking about that, and we're not really evolving our knowledge about Kemetic, Kemetic tradition and stuff like that. That's my only problem about it. So anyway.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you. And I'm just real quick. The last thing I want to say to matter was it don't you want to ride the wave, like don't sometimes like you want to kind of like just ride the wave. I guess that's the best way I could put it. Just ride it, like don't fight it. Things I see that true change like happens like on a subconscious level, and you can have a physical change or like things happen consciously, and like it seems like you like consciously thinking so strongly about stuff that the true change that you're looking for is going to happen when you kind of, not when you stop, but when you kind of just let it flow more easily, because in a way you kind of fighting it. It seems like you kind of fighting it, and I say that just respectfully. Peace.
I received all of that. 8 Ways to Sunday. Thank you for sharing that. That's all I had.
All right, June, Emicat, Chavis.
Yeah, since the discussion was on nomenclature, from what I got, I think the emphasis was on how we define things in particular discussions or in or how things are defined in study fields. I think that was key, because and from the continuing conversation, I think from what I've noticed, on this on the different discussions out of this one, is that maybe how they talk about when they say that children should learn coding so that they can have problem solving skills, or children should learn music. I think it would also be good to add languages in it, where there's obviously coding comes with language, but spoken languages as well. Is definitely recommended, because I think sometimes people get so involved in the language that they speak that and because it just comes naturally, when you don't step out and learn where you have to learn a different language, then you kind of forget the fundamentals of what a language is in that sense. because then we just use words for, we just use without thinking why we're using it or how they function and things like that. But then when you actually put yourself where you have to study, second language, in that sense, then it forces you to actually learn your first language better, but also it forces you to empathize a lot. And then also just, I think it would make people understand the importance of, why we have to define things, because then you have to kind of figure out why things are named the way they're named in that set of language as opposed to the set of language that you are. So defining things is key. But I would just say it would be good for people to try to at least try to learn a second language. If not, then if you only speak one language, then try to really understand the fundamentals of that particular language that you speak, why things are done the way they are, why they're defined the way you are. And I know you do a lot etymology and things like that, which is really, really good, because then it makes us really try to understand how these words have been used in the past and why we use them now in this certain manner, or why other people in a different field use them in those manners. So I think that's the only thing I would say in closing. Really learn what a language is, and then I think it help people understand all these things with nomenclature and things of that nature.
All right, nice. June, Chavis, Chavis probably sleep. June
No, I'm
probably.
good.
Okay.
Matt wrapped it up.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody tuning in who was still in the chat and tuned in and everything. Just some things I want to just quickly recap or summarize is that the previous video, which we did tonight, was the importance of nomenclature. And so check that video out. If you lasted this long and you've seen the end of this one, then definitely check that video out. This video is a discussion on that. So this is the format that we have and we're going to continue to have if we give presentation style live streams. So our Divine Words Wednesdays used to be presentations. And so to keep it compact and digestible, we just do the presentation as a stream, and then we'll have a stream right after that where we open it up for discussions. That way, at least people won't have to sift through 3 hours of video to find out, listen to this thing all day. They can just watch the video for the information, and then, then they can tune into this and see what everybody said about it. So that's the way that we do it, to prevent having these long 8-hour videos where we have some information, but then people don't want to sit and watch an 8-hour video, so they'll miss it. All right. But on what was specifically mentioned, the cherry picking of cultures creates a problem. Now people do it, and you can do it, but you got to understand when you do that, you open yourself up for weak spots, vulnerabilities, and handicap, because it's almost like a car where you can't put a Toyota engine inside of a Mercedes Benz and expect it to run like it's supposed to. So mix matching parts or cherry picking different aspects of cultures comes with a consequence. And so a culture is a complete system. It's a paradigm. And so when you cherry pick, you're picking from different paradigms, trying to put them together. And that can work for you to an extent. But like I said, it's not going to work for you efficiently and effectively as if it was a complete machine made for itself. And so that's what people have done with Egypt, because they didn't have the resources to dig into Egypt as we do today, and we should continue to do. So in the 70s and 80s, you have a lot of people that came up and tried to uplift people and teach people, but they had limited resources or time or just organization, period. For example, just to give an example, you have Raoul Nefer Amen, who is the head of the Asar Set Society. He started in 1973, I guess officially with the formation of the organization, the society. From then until now, his one of the things that he does not push, or the organization doesn't push still to this day, is the importance of learning the language. Because back then it wasn't that many teachers, it wasn't that many resources, so that's how it started out, and that's how it kept unfolding to where it is today, where that's not an emphasis within that organization. And that and other organizations and other people, individuals, because they hadn't have the tools, they had to go elsewhere to find things that may relate or correlate to Egypt. So they reach into India, they'll reach into China, they'll reach into other cultures outside of that, and kind of put this thing together to have a better understanding. And that's what they did. They did their best, and they continue to do their best. But now it's a new day. So now we have people who are learning the language, people who are able to study, develop more superior methodology, and apply more rigor, and they're studying, so they're revisiting a lot of these things. And so on this side, we have to understand that there's going to be some corrections happening, but we have to do that in a very respectful way. And some people in these communities don't know how to do that. So it comes across as being very disrespectful to people who paved the way, elders or what have you, and people are correcting things, outside of that scholarly, good character way, and that's causing a problem. So we got that going on.
Yeah.
And we have to change that. But now's the time. So this is what we're elevating, we're raising, we're encouraging people to learn the language, because there's a lot of work to do. And so we're just sharing things for that. There was something else, but man, I forgot. I guess it's late. But I definitely wanted to address that, and again stress the importance of nomenclature. It's the only way we're going to get through these conversations, And it was something else, with science or something. But we'll get there. But I guess with that, I'm gonna say, Shem Hotep, appreciate everybody for tuning in. Good night and fair, which is good night. Shem Hotep is to leave with satisfaction. And that's another thing. Metaphorically, ETM Hotep and Shemem Hotep is, the greeting and departure, or, entrance and departure greetings. But when you bid somebody farewell and hope that they leave satisfied, you're also saying that you hope that they leave on the same page as you, which is the goal of communication. So when we say Shem, some people just say Shem, just like some people say Hotep. But you say Shemem Hotep, which is to leave with satisfaction, to go and be satisfied. It comes from literally giving people food as they leave your presence, but we use it in a figurative way today. Shemem Hotep. So I'm gonna say Shemem Hotep to everybody, and I'll see y'all.